He was happy, joyful even, standing with his two brothers, his father looking at him proudly as they welcomed Leonette's family to the keep. Leonette's parents, then her uncle Sir John Fossaway and his aunt Janna, and then Lady Jane and his uncle Sir Gunthor. He knew his father was miffed that the wedding wasn't bigger. He knew that he had wished the whole realm to come celebrate this day. Garland, though, was much happier with who had, though as he looked to his Marjorie, he found himself missing someone who had not. When John had arrived a few weeks ago, he had seen how his sister's mood had improved greatly, later finding out from Willis the reason for it. He had chuckled at the thought of how his grandmother would have felt when she found out. Married in front of a tree, given the pomp and circumstance of his own wedding, that seemed like a good alternative to him. Not that he would deny Leonette the wedding she deserved or wished for. She had made him far happier than he had ever thought he could be. It was up to him to do the same for her. Once everyone had made their introductions and he was told there would be no one else arriving for some time, Garland did what he usually did to relax. He headed to the sparring yard with Loras, keen to join him. "A spar, brother, shouldn't you change?" Loras asked. "By the 7 Loras, it's bad enough I hear that from grandmother, you too," he said with a laugh. "I wouldn't want to mark your beautiful clothes, brother," Loras said with a grin he was so keen to knock off his face. The spar was far easier than it should have been, whether it was Loras not wishing to mark his clothing or that Garland himself was a little piqued at some of his previous spars, he couldn't tell. Loras, though, took the loss in good spirits and even brought him the mug of water to drink afterward. "You were a demon out there, brother," Loras said as they sat and drank. "I had to be. You and your friends are far too good." Garland said. "You sparred against John when he was here?" Loras asked. "No," he said, turning around to make sure no one was near them. "Sir Arthur?" He said a moment later, a smile on his face as he thought of it a few weeks earlier. Despite John spending his time with Marjorie or Sansa, or even with his grandmother, though he could understand that, Garland hoped for a spar. He dearly wished to gain his revenge for the loss he suffered during the tourney. To say John had improved was an understatement. He had thought he had him at one point, only to then find himself yielding and looking up stunned at the sword that was pointed to his neck. That they had sparred far away from everyone had made him ask John why he'd not faced him in public. "You know why, Sir Garland," John said formally as always. "You don't wish them to know just how good you truly are. It's one thing winning tourneys against people my own age. Should I beat someone of your renown, people would speak. I don't wish them to speak too much. Not yet," John said. "Well, one day I can tell people I fought against a king. I'll want a rematch, John, next time you're here." "Then you shall have it, sir," John said with a smirk as he looked to Sir Damon. It was now time he felt for that rematch. And so seeing John and Sir Damon, he asked and saw John look to the knight as he walked with them to the sparring yard, grabbing 2 swords. John handed him one and Sir Damon the other. "John, follow me, Sir Garland. Consider this a gift for your wedding," John said. And Garland smirked at the cocky look on John's face, eager to wipe it off. They walked through the gardens, deep into them before coming to one of the enclosed ones. Garland looked at the Helm Knight and saw John nod, so he took up his stance and readied for the spar. Sir Damon, though, didn't move. Instead, he just waited for John to give him the nod. "Best of 3, Sir Garland?" John said, and Garland nodded nervously. He'd not seen Sir Damon fight, not seen how good he was with a blade, and facing the unknown was much harder than those you had experience against. It was why, despite the public nature of his own sparring at Highgarden, something he just couldn't get away from no matter how hard he tried, he never competed in tourneys. Just like John in his way, Garland too was keeping his skill a secret. The blade moved fast and he barely dodged it. The second blow was even quicker. Within 3, he was on the defensive and needed to move back just to stay in the fight. By the 4th and 5th, he knew he was outmatched. John was fast, and Sir Damon equally so, but no one he'd ever faced had a technique this perfect. He parried 2 more blows and was then beaten, the trip catching him completely off guard, and he yielded before he stood back up. "Again," he said determinedly. The second one was even quicker, Garland finding he just couldn't keep up or predict where the blows would come from. A feint, a thrust, a sweep, one after another, and each being successful. Before he knew it, he was yielding again, with the sword pointed to his neck as his own laid in the grass. Looking over to John, he was glad to see him not smiling, not sure if he could face that after the loss he'd just suffered. Why John had considered this a present was beyond him. To see him defeated so soundly, how was that a gift? "You don't seem happy, Sir Garland," John said. "How is that a present, John?" He asked, his voice a little annoyed. "Oh, that's not your present. The lessons for the rest of the day are," John said. "Lessons? Sir Damon, your helm," John said, smirking now. "Your Grace," Sir Damon said. Garland looked on as the knight took his full helm off, the man's dark hair and violet eye clear to him now. He looked at him, and then John, and then the knight again. He knew he was missing something here, but for the life of him couldn't figure out what it was. "Sir Garland, may I present Sir Arthur Dane, the Sword of the Morning," John said, and Garland gasped. "John," he said, looking at him to see if this was some sort of jape. "I'll stay indoors as agreed. Arthur, Garland, enjoy," John said as he walked away. "Shall we, sir?" Sir Arthur said, and Garland almost fell to the ground, so quickly did he move to grab his sword. Now, he was lost in the memory of it. The day had been one of the best of his life. He and Sir Arthur sparring for hours and then talking for just as long. By the time they'd gone inside, it was dark, and he was both exhausted and annoyed at his tiredness, wanting nothing more than to continue. Garland. What?" he said when he turned to see Loras. "I said, what was it like for you to face him?" "I envy you, brother. You get to do that all the time. I envy you," Garland said, standing up and slapping his brother on the back. "Come, grandmother will no doubt wish to check every thread on our clothing to make sure we've not messed it up," he said, laughing as they walked into the keep. 3 days later he woke up early, his mother coming in to wish him well, followed by his grandmother and finally his father, all three of them telling him how proud they were of him and how happy they were for him. As he was helped into his clothing, and then later when Willis and Loras arrived to walk with him to the sept, he felt content, happy, but mostly eager. From the first time he'd met her, she'd been all he truly wanted, and from today on she would, his and he hers, today, tomorrow, always. Casterly Rock, 296 AC, J. Harry's Targaryen. It was good to be back, and to spend time with Lygeron too, Rhaenys too having missed her brother. The dragon, though, was not the only one he missed. Ghost had come out to the cave the night he'd returned, the white wolf curling up beside him and not letting him out of his sight ever since. As for the people, Jaime was happy to see them well, and John had to resist the urge to hug him the moment he saw him. Only the fact there were others around stopping him. He spent time with Daisy and Joanna, the little girl seeming to have grown ever bigger since he'd been away. The one drawback to him being away was compounded on his return. Joy had traveled to Castamere with her ladies, as Jenna had begun to call her foster friends. John had been looking forward to riding with her. Winter, when he'd taken her out for a ride, almost looking at him as if to say, where was their racing partner? "That's better, Satin. But hold the damn thing up more or you'll end up on your arse," Bronze said, and demonstrated just that by getting inside Satin's guard and simply pushing him over. "Has he been like that since I left?" John asked, turning to Brienne. "I think he was born like that, John," Brienne said, and he chuckled. "Well, shall we?" he said, and she nodded, both of them lining up to face each other. After sparring for a bit, he spent some time with Melisandre. The new eggs had not been as much of a hit with her as he had thought, nor the crown. Instead, it was the pendant that she found so fascinating. It was magical, she said, resonated power, and almost as soon as she did, John could feel it. He wondered had he not felt it before. Was he so wrapped up in the eggs and the crown that he'd ignored it? He couldn't be sure. Maybe he did, or maybe it wasn't there before. When he put the pendant on, it seemed to almost fit him perfectly. It hung just right, and so he left it there. He asked Melisandre to keep it to herself for now, but should anything strange begin to happen, or she noticed something different about him, then she was to act immediately. So far, his interchanges with magic had been mainly positive. The law of averages, however, said they would not always be. I saw a vision in the flames, my prince. 2 of my order have been sent out into the world. 1 heads this way, Melisandre said as they sat together. Who? Kinvara, the flame of truth. She's the one who sent Arthur on his missions? She is my prince, Melisandre said, and he nodded. While Melisandre may not have cared about the eggs or the crown, Jaime and Tyrion did, both of them eager to see them and not surprisingly at all to him, both going for different things. Tyrion was fascinated that there were more eggs, even more so when Jon explained these were not going to hatch anytime soon, laughing when Jon told him they were likely for his children. Planning that far ahead, are you, nephew? Tyrion chuckled as they sat in his solar. Marge and I, we're married, uncle, he said nervously. I thought you said you only stayed 2 days at Highgarden, Jaime asked as he held the Conqueror's crown in his hands. We did, my lord, but we were married before that, he said nervously. It took him some time to explain, and he could see that both of them weren't happy with him, each for different reasons. Tyrion was looking at the political ramifications of his actions. For Jaime, though it was more that he'd not confided in him, he knew he'd need to speak to him later on about it, and that in doing so he'd probably bring up other things he'd been keeping beneath the surface. Their relationship has shifted over time, from knight and squire to Kingsguard and king, from hand to father. He knew it then. Had probably known it for some time, but flying away he had felt it. This was his father by choice, and looking at him, he could see that he'd hurt him by not telling him about the wedding. Jaime hid it well, though, and they instead concentrated on other things, the letters he'd received when he was gone, and the crown itself. This is a boon, Jon, a great one, Jaime said, holding up the crown. I know, my lord. For my family, that crown is a symbol. That I have it will mean a lot to those who've always supported us, he said, and Jaime nodded. I read your letters, Jon, Tyrion said, smirching when he handed him the open letters. This is my life now. No privacy, he said with an over-exaggerated sigh, making them both laugh. Indeed. Get used to it, your grace, Jaime said with a small amount of bite in the comment. So anything I need to know? He asked as he looked down at the first letter. Where to begin? Jaime said and looked to Tyrion. Before the letters, there are a couple of things I think you should know, Tyrion said, and Jon nodded to him to proceed. Our caravans in Essos were attacked. Mopatis and Aaron ordered it. We lost some men, Jon. How many? He asked. Almost 50, Tyrion said, and he looked at him to be sure he'd heard it right. What are we doing about it? He asked, hoping they'd moved already. Kevin has gone to Myr to hire the Company of the Rose. They'll take care of the men who did it. As for Mopatis and Aaron, Jon Arryn will get his at the right time. Mopatis, though, has crossed the line. We should do something about him, he said, and both of the brothers nodded. Indeed, he's well protected, though, Jon. It may be difficult, Jaime said. We'll speak to Richard, my lord, he said. Jaime, seeming to accept it. Which brings me to the other thing, Princess Arianne. Jon, I told her, I wish to wed her, Tyrion said, looking at him as if he would object. That's great news, uncle. Great news. You're happy. She makes you happy? He asked. She does, he said, smiling. Then perhaps a visit to Dorne is needed, he said, and saw Tyrion's smile become larger. I had planned to go, he said, and Jon chuckled, knowing exactly how his uncle was feeling. I won't be going anywhere for some time, so as soon as you feel ready you should go, uncle. The letters, Jaime said, and Jon smirked at that. Out of 3 of them, that it was Jaime who was so focused on work was a sign of just how much he had changed. It turned out that the letters were interesting. The married Bolton was on his way to the Rock and wouldn't be alone. If Melisandre was right, then Kinvara would be coming too, and they wouldn't be the only Red Priests in the West. Lord Beric confirming that he and Thoros of Myr would be leaving the Stormlands and coming also. They would be very busy indeed. Tyrion said he'd need to be there for them all, and Jon tried to convince him he would not. In the end, they almost agreed to disagree. Besides, If there was anything that Tyrion needed to be at the Rock, for it was more likely to be Lygeron than any visitor. The time was drawing close, and even his uncle could feel it, Jon promising to be with him when he took his first ride. After speaking to Cirilla and finding out from her that their cousin adored Tyrion and that Lygeron was getting more excited about something, Jon headed out to the dragons. "Is he ready, Ray?" he said, asking his sister, and heard the almost petulant voice of his son in his ear. "I'm ready, father, please. It's time, can we?" Lygeron asked. "Tomorrow night, my son," he said, and felt the joy resonate from the dragon. It ended up being a bit short-lived, the rain falling far too heavy the next night and the night after to even think about having Tyrion take his first flight. It was actually 3 days later when they managed it, he and his uncle alone on the beach waiting for darkness to fall. When it did, the night sky was clear, and though he could feel Tyrion's nervousness, there was excitement too, especially when the dragons came from the cave. "Are you ready, Uncle?" he asked. I think so. You know the words." "Shh. Valyrian," Tyrion asked. "Valyrian," he said, and Tyrion nodded. They climbed up on the dragons, and he looked over to see Tyrion move and make himself comfortable. Once he had, Jon nodded and waited for his uncle to speak the words. He'd dictate this flight. Jon was just there to guide him through it. "Sovagan Lygeron." "Fly, Lygeron," Tyrion said, and Jon could see the joy on his uncle's face and feel his son's as they took to the sky. "Mazigon hova mandia, ishiolong jarane jut, ivishtragi zichana, emagon mihasikivamvis." "Come, big sister, are we going to let them have all the fun?" he said, and they took off following after them. White Harbor, 296 AC, Sir Richard Lonmouth. It took him far longer to get the men here than it should have, the distance that both the letters had to go and that the men then had to travel, making it a much larger undertaking. Not that he minded staying in White Harbor, his lips' whispers may take a little longer to reach him, but reach him they did, and Lord Wyman was a gracious host. He even offered him some of his own men when the time came, and Richard gladly accepted, once he told the Lord his plans. Wyman was only too eager to add his expertise. Wyman himself was in a very happy mood. With Kevin gone to Essos, he had delayed his trip to Lannisport for now, but would travel once the Lord had returned, and the betrothal between Winifred and Robb Stark was a sign of just how far they had risen. It would be his blood that sat in Winterfell for generations to come, and he'd be tied to the king by blood soon also. Richard felt the man deserved that and other honors, a leal house to the Starks and now to the Targaryens, a good man and true as Barristan would say. As he walked through the streets of White Harbor to Morau's house, he was eager to get to work, to see this done, and to then head west to see his king once again, to see how large the dragons had grown, and to for himself see his king on one's back. "Letters, sir, a number of them," Morau said when he entered the house. "How many?" he asked. "A few, sir," Morau said. He nodded and asked for some wine before heading upstairs and taking a seat at the table. The letters came from far and wide, and he smirked, looking at the sealed lips on them. Opening them, he began to read and found only one or two of the things surprising to him. Most were confirmations of what he knew, but some interested him greatly. The West. A stunted lion has been caught in a snake's embrace, both are unharmed by the experience. The Reach. A white wolf arrived unexpectedly and left a few days later. The roses prepared to celebrate and welcome apples from a different branch. The North. A quiet wolf has begun to roar. Not content with putting a fish back into the river, it seeks to bring an axe to bear. A tavern has attracted the attention of a rabid dog. Its owner's daughter need beware. Dragonstone. A mangy cat learns no lessons and has felt the brush of a stag's antlers more than once. An onion brings tears to its eyes each time it tries to bite. King's Landing. A cat purrs in a spiral's embrace. A falcon fumes and decries the faith, and a cheesemonger's men are ever alert. More and more arrive to keep the fat man safe. The others were just confirmations, and so he paid them no mind. The tavern, though, gave him an idea. After speaking to Morau, he found the tavern to be on Hornwood and not Bolton lands, and so he left Morau with instructions to welcome the men and to send them on to him. He then made his way to the new castle, eager to speak to Lord Wyman about his plans. He'd needed to leave now, have it arranged, and keep the girl safe until his men arrived. This would be the best chance of taking him. He knew, all the other plans requiring a much bigger risk. Arriving at the new castle, he found Wyman and Wylis holding court. Nodding to them, he took a seat, and soon Wyman begged off and allowed for Wylis to continue. He followed the lord to his solar, Wyman keen to see what had brought him back, as he'd earlier told him he'd be gone for a day or so. "Has something happened, Richard?" Wyman asked worriedly.
What?
"Nothing out of the ordinary. Well, apart from confirmation that our king had indeed been flying his dragon all over the realm." He chuckled. "A sight to see, Richard," Wyman said. "Indeed. Men. Wyman, I need a 6 at least, and a few good ones to bring my men to me when they arrive." He said. "You're not waiting for them?" Wyman asked. "I can't. There is a chance to do this now. If I wait, not only may he get away, but another girl will suffer. I'll have them made ready. I'll give you my best, Richard. Where?" "A tavern in the village near Hornwood," he said. "Rickard's girl. By the gods, stop him, Richard. Put him down," Wyman said, and Richard was surprised, and yet not, that the lord knew both the tavern and the keeper. "I will. We leave as soon as we can, Wyman." He watched as the lord got up and called to his guard, telling him to organize the men and to have them dressed over their armor. Within an hour he was on the road, and they rode hard, the week's journey taking its toll on them and their horses. Richard, though, was glad that when he arrived to find the girl was unharmed. The tavern itself wasn't the busiest he'd been in, and he and his group almost doubled its customers. The girl was young, 2 and 10, 3 and 10 at most, a pretty young red-headed girl with small spots on her face, which only made her look younger. After speaking to the tavern owner, who he now knew was the girl's father, Richard took all the rooms and ordered food and drink for his men. The young girl happy to serve, and even more so at the few extra coppers he gave her. "Rickard, I have a proposition for you," he said a few days into his stay. "Aye, and what be that?" the man said, looking at him warily. "There is a man who comes by, usually with some others, I believe, a man who seems far too interested in Sarah. You know the man I speak." "Aye, I know him. Offered me a silver stag for my daughter's maidenhead, threw him and his friend out. But they come by, them and some of the Bolton men," Rickard said, looking at him more curiously now. "This man has done terrible things, Rickard, to girls and women, terrible things. I believe he wishes to do so to Sarah also." "He'll not lay a hand on my girl," Rickard said, standing up. "No, he won't. I'll see to that," he said, and looked to the man. "So this? What was it you called it?" "A proposition." "Rickard," he said, as he began to lay out his plans. It took another week and a half for his men to arrive, and Rickard made more coin from them than he had in many a year. A week later, the Bolton men arrived. They were an ugly bunch, the dregs of Lord Bolton's guards he'd imagine, foul of smell and looks, not to mention behavior. When Ramsay arrived, Richard watched from the hole in the wall that Rickard had allowed him to put in. He had been at the Dread Fort not too long ago, so to be seen here may raise some questions, and worse, Ramsay's hackles. It didn't take too long to see just how eager Ramsay was to get close to Sarah, though he didn't manhandle her. He did stare longingly at her, licking his large lips every so often. They left without incident that night, but Richard was wary. Something was off. He'd missed something. He was passing Sarah's room when he smelt it, the stench overpowering and the girl running quickly to the door. "Sorry, sir. The smell. Gods, the smell," she said as she passed him. And he knew then what it had been that he'd missed. The noises from the room and the smell coming closer proved it even more so, and Richard waited with his knife ready. But the door never opened and the noises subsided, and then, when he opened it himself, the man was gone. It was an hour later that night when he was told by one of his men that they had ridden off and taken a girl with them. He had his men mount up and began the chase, glad he put men on the road just in case. The first of them they found dead, the second missing, and both he and his men were disturbed by this. They followed the trail for hours and never came close to finding where the riders had gone. As the sun rose the next morning, he felt such a fool. He should have just ambushed him when he had come in. That had been his first plan. Fill the tavern with his men and just kill them all. The Boltons, Reek, Ramsay, all who came in. "Sir, Carl," one of his men said and pointed in the distance, Carl walking towards them. They mounted and rode to him, finding him unharmed, and after he doubled up on one of the horses, he led him to a small cabin in the woods, the sounds of dogs barking and a girl's screams leading them towards it. Richard told his men to surround it, then giving the order they attacked. The dogs' barks gave their presence away, or would have if the girl wasn't screaming as loudly as she was. Bursting through the door, they found the Bolton men sitting and drinking inside. They'd barely had time to grab their weapons, though. Richard's were men upon them far faster than they could move. As they opened a door to the back, though, Richard glanced back at the window and saw a shape move into the woods. Leaving them, he ran to his horse and grabbed the Myrish crossbow before quickly chasing after the figure that was running away fast. Seeing him duck down behind a tree trunk, Richard instinctively rolled and the arrow missed him. Aiming the crossbow, he took his shot and was far more successful, the pained screams proving that. He reloaded and moved carefully forward, zigzagging between the trees just in case, though there proved to be no need to. He found Ramsay leaning up against the tree, the bolt in his chest, and the blood pooled between his fingers. "Who are you?" Ramsay said, looking at him. "Sir, the girl's safe. We got the rest of 'em." He heard a voice behind him, even the foul-smelling one. He asked, not looking behind him. Him too. Good. I'll deal with this one," Richard said as he fired the bolt. Even with two in him, it took him time to die. The second bolt had caught Ramsay in the throat, and he gurgled his last after a few moments. He then had his men drag the body back to the cabin, the hounds barking even more loudly as they did so. Giving the nod to them, he walked inside to see the carnage and to get away from what needed to be done to the animals. When it was done, they too were dragged inside, and as he saw the girl spit on Ramsay's body, he walked from the house. The flames caught quickly, and he let the panicked horses free, watching as they ran off to wherever. Inside, the bodies had been laid out as if they were sitting and drinking. Their coin, possessions, anything they owned was left on or around them. The smell forced the girl and some of his men to empty their stomachs, but unfortunately for him, Richard had smelled burned flesh before. Once it was done, he walked into the destroyed cabin, checking the bodies and covering up that he'd been there. To anyone, this would look like a fire had claimed them all during a drunken night, the melted mugs and bottles on the table making that clear. "Come, we're done here. Let's take this girl home and then be off," he said as they mounted up. The girl lived with her mother and younger brother, a small household with not much coin, so after telling Richard it was done and knowing the tale he'd tell, should he be asked, Richard made the family an offer. Come with him back to White Harbor and he'd see them set up in Lord Wyman's service, or come south and he'd find them somewhere else. That they chose the north was no great surprise to him, and a few weeks later he was saying his goodbyes to Wyman. Roose may still turn out to be a problem for that, though he'd need his king's permission. For this, he had not, and as the ship left White Harbor heading for King's Landing, he felt good. As he slept in his cabin that night, though his dreams were of burning flesh, the smell still fresh in his nose. It was the image of the man reaching for the sword, though that woke him, though, the pained sounds of his voice muffled by the rope around his neck. The fire that raged beside the man being far less horrific than the look on Brandon Stark's face. Richard barely made it to the bucket as he threw up. Reaching for the mug of ale, he drank it quickly before he emptied his stomach once again. Winterfell, 296 AC. Ned. With the children gone, things were far quieter in Winterfell. He had even considered fostering some children himself, and had spoken to Elle about it, though she wasn't agreeable for now. He knew why that was, until the replies came back from the letters he had sent. They were kinda in a holding pattern. For Ned, it was as if he was on the fringes of a great battle. All the work had been done, the terrain picked out, the tactics were set, and yet they would be left to wait. In almost all aspects of their daily life, though it was clear that Elle was the Lady of Winterfell, she ran the household, and just having her with him was a huge help. Not only did it allow him to concentrate on other things, but he had someone to discuss things with, to confide in, and run ideas by. It had been Elle who suggested they hire someone to teach the children in Wintertown to read and write, something which had gone down really well in the ever-growing town, especially among the first arrivals from King's Landing. With Richard's and Wyman's help, they had offered people in Flea Bottom the chance to come and live in the north. Work, food, and a better life, just as John had said, had been a great incentive, and so far they had sent 2 ships to collect people, Ned riding back to Winterfell after helping to settle in the second group. You think they'll be able to manage the winter, my lord?
Sir Roderick asked as they rode through the gates.
Oh, I think so. Did you see how they reacted to the home? He asked back. Aye, I did, knowing they'd only be staying for a while before being moved to homes of their own. And the food, too. God's what young John said about the conditions up there. I'd not have believed it lest I'd seen it myself. Aye, feeding them now is easy, but we need to be able to rely on ourselves more. We need more of everything, though, he said as he dismounted. Glass gardens, my lord? Aye, them and other things. He was walking through courtyard when he saw her. She was walking with Beth Cassell and Jane Poole, both girls having become her students now that Arya was gone. As he watched them head to the glass gardens, Harwin came walking his way, the guards seeming to be looking for him. My lord, Maester Luwin wished to speak to you, Harwin said. Is he in his room? Aye, he is, my lord. Thanks, Harwin. I'll go to him. Go about your duties, my lord, Harwin said, walking away. Walking to the maester's rooms, he thought more about the food situation. Buying it in and adding it to what they had was both a long-term and short-term solution, but they needed to be more self-reliant. John had made a suggestion about the glass gardens, and he'd forgotten what it was. So focused was he on other things that it had just slipped his mind. He wondered if Luwin knew of it. Lord Stark. I was looking for you, Luwin said, the maester having met him halfway to his room. Aye, Harwin said. Let's speak inside, he said, motioning to the stairs behind the maester. Of course, my lord, Luwin said as they turned. He seemed about to say more, but Ned spoke first. Luwin, did John ever speak to you about the glass gardens? Some plan he had to make them cost less? Aye, he did. He suggested that, rather than the glass itself, we should speak masters of the prentice glass blowers and glaziers of Myr, that we buy them from them, Luwin said, and Ned, shocked, interrupted. Slaves. He wished up to buy slaves, he said, shocked. Aye, and once we did, we were to offer them their freedom and set them up here as craftsmen. We then used the ice to import sand from Dorne, a barter system, Luwin said, and Ned looked at him, having not heard this part and only barely remembering the other. Could that work, Luwin? It could, my lord. Apart from the initial outlay to buy the men from their masters and the transport, once they were here and we had them teach more of our own, it'd cut down the cost by a lot. How much? Down to a quarter at worst. Maybe even better, my lord. I'll write to Wyman. He knows more of Essos than I. Very good, my lord. There are some letters from you, King's Landing and River Run, Luwin said, handing him the letters. Thank you, maester. My lord, Luwin said as Ned got up to walk from the room. Despite wishing to read the letters immediately, he waited until he got to his silver before opening them. The one from the High Septon was not a surprise, the man rejecting his request. Robert's, too, was no surprise. His former friend japing and saying he had his blessing, even if he couldn't give it to him legally. It was Kat's, which had him shaking his head, never having expected her to write such a letter. Ned, while it pains me that it has come to this, I cannot fault your words, and despite my own hopes, it's clear that our marriage is over. I will write to the High Septon myself to add my agreement to your request to dissolve our marriage. Knowing our children remain in their rightful position means more to me than holding on to what we once had. I would wish you well. But I cannot, not at this time, which I hope you understand. But I am trying, Ned. Kat. He could barely believe it, that she was all but giving him permission to do that which he wished was unexpected. He found his thoughts go a million miles a second, The children. He needed to tell the children. Rob, Sansa, Arya, Bran. He needed to speak to them, tell them what he was about to do. Elle. He got up and walked from his room, so exited to speak to her that he forgot to put his cloak on. Not that he felt the cold on the walk to the glass gardens, and it was only when he reached it and heard the laughter of the girls inside that he remembered she was not alone. Still, he walked in and saw them sitting there, Elle reading from a book and Beth and Jane giggling as she did so. When she saw him and saw his face, she asked the girls to leave, Ned glad she did so, and though they were disappointed, neither girl raised a fuss. Ned? She asked when he moved to her, the kiss he gave her silencing her for now. Marry me? He said, as she looked to him, her eyes full of hope and yet questioning. Marry me. I've got the letters back. Not that they matter, but they are apart from Catelyn's, what I expected. Marry me, Elle, here in Winterfell in front of our gods. Be my wife? I'll marry you, she said, smiling, and he felt his heart soar as he kissed her again. Highgarden, 296 AC. Sansa. Each day the wedding drew closer, and she got more and more excited. Balls, feasts, tourneys, she loved them all. But she'd been to 2 weddings in her life, and they were the best days of it so far. As she and Marjorie were at their final fitting for their dresses, Mira and Marjorie's cousins having faced theirs the day before, she looked to see her friend and saw the smile on her face. It had been there far more since her brother had visited so unexpectedly. Where before Jon's arrival Marjorie had tried to be happy, after it she was, and Sansa felt so relieved for her friend. She too had enjoyed Jon's visit, glad to spend some time with him, even if he spent more with his wife than she. Not that Sansa would begrudge him that, though she did argue with him over the nature of the wedding. What were you thinking, Jon? She said as they sat in her room. Sansa, he asked, confused. The wedding, Jon. How could you have a wedding without me? Marjorie is my best friend. You're my brother, and you never told me, never invited me, she said, miffed. It was something I just thought of, something I needed to do, and to not have anyone talk me out of it. You think I'd have talked you out of it? She asked, frowning at him. No, but telling you, Sansa, it's one thing me keeping it secret, or even Marjorie. Walder and Jorah are sworn to me they'll keep any of my secrets. I'd not have you lie for me, Sansa. Not if I could help it, he said. But I wish to be there, Jon, she said sadly. And you will. Do you think I'd not give you the chance to wear your prettiest dress and to dance with all those brave knights who'd no doubt ask you? He said, making her blush. This was for me, Sansa, for me and Marjorie. I know I'll have to marry her publicly, and I will. You may even get to help plan it, he said. And she smiled. For true? For true, little sister, he said, and she hugged him. She had taken comfort in that, and she and Marjorie had even spoken of it, making and discarding plans for what the more public of her and Jon's weddings would be like. Even though Garland and Leonette's was being organized by Lady Ellery and Leonette's mother, Lady Florence, she and Marjorie had watched, and along with Leonette had made suggestions, these dresses being one of them. After the fitting, they made their way back to Highgarden and saw the rooms being readied. The wedding would be on the morrow, and Sansa couldn't wait. Sleep that night was hard to come by, Sansa finding herself thinking of the ceremony in the sept and the dancing to come, before she began to feel bad about it, a sad thought coming to her head. While she may be able to dance with gallant and brave knights, as Jon had said, she'd not be able to dance with who she wished to, and so it was with that thought that she finally drifted off. Sansa, wake up, you should be up by now, Mira said, shaking her. What? It's still night, leave me be, she mumbled sleepily, only to hear giggles in the room. Sansa, it's past noon. The wedding is to take place within the hour, Marjorie said. She practically jumped from the bed, almost tripping over her nightdress as she looked around panicked, only to hear the laughs coming from Marjorie and the others. What? It's not funny. Wait, why aren't you all dressed? She asked, and then realized they'd japed her. Sorry, but it was the only way to wake you. The maids will be in to run you a bath before you break your fast. We've a long day ahead, Sansa. You need to get ready, Marjorie said as she and the others walked from her room. Sansa glowered at them before laughing and reaching down to Fang, her wolf too seeming happy for the day to come. After she bathed and broke her fast, they all went to get changed into their wedding clothes before making their way to the sept. She saw Garland standing at the front with Loras and Willis, all three brothers looking handsome, and Willis even with his cane not seeming out of place. When Leonette came and stood beside Garland, she was not the only one who marveled at her dress and hair. She looked beautiful, and more than anything else she seemed happy. The ceremony itself was almost a blur to her though, Sansa looking to see the happy and proud smiles on the Tyrells' faces, Lord Mason Ellery beaming, Lady Olenna full of pride, Loras too wearing the same look as his grandmother. Marjorie, though, looked on almost dreamily, Sansa wondering if she was picturing her own wedding, and when she looked to Willis she felt her heart pain for him. He was happy for his brother, she could see that, he too was proud, and yet there was some sadness there too, some regret. Sansa wished to wipe that from his face, remove it from his heart, and felt unable to do so. Wasn't it the most wondrous thing you've ever seen? Mira said excitedly. Truly, Lady Leonette looked so beautiful, and my cousin made the most dashing husband. Don't you think so, Eleanor? Mega said. When the dancing started, Sansa watched as Garland and Leonette danced first, then as others joined in. She saw how Marjorie danced to be polite, but had no real interest in it, and found she too didn't wish to, politeness too being her only reason. When she saw him walk to the outside balcony, she followed behind, finding him standing alone and looking out at the night sky. You should be inside dancing, Sansa, Willis said when she leaned against the wall beside him. I find I have no wish to, besides a girl should get to do what she wishes during a wedding, should she not? She said, looking at him. She should, Willis said as he looked back out at the sky. John told me some of their names, she said, pointing to the stars. Which are? Willis asked, looking at her. Shh! That one is the ice dragon, she said, pointing to a group of stars in the sky. That one is Ghost, she said, pointing to another and hearing Willis chuckle. What? She asked. I'm not surprised John showed you that one, Willis said, making her giggle too. Willis proceeded to tell her even more of the names, Crone's Lantern and Moonmaid and the Sword of the Morning being the ones which stood out. How long they stood there talking she didn't know, only that she felt no desire or need to go back inside. By the time they did, it was close to the bedding, and she and some of the younger girls took that as their time to leave. Willis kindly walked her back to her room, and she bid him good night, not sure if he was heading back to the wedding feast, or what seemed to be more likely heading to his own room. As she lay in bed that night, she found she'd enjoyed this wedding even more than the previous two. It wasn't bigger or more elaborate, and though she knew Garland and Leonette well, it wasn't that. Smiling as she rolled over to fall asleep, she realized the reason why and hoped he'd enjoyed the night as much as she had. Casterly Rock, 296 AC. Jamie. Seeing John flying on a dragon had been one thing. He'd been nervous, excited, and relieved when he'd landed. To then have the chance to do the same with his little brother, Jamie wasn't sure how he felt about that. It was what John said next, though, that had him shaking his head and wondering if this was truly the world he lived in now. You're jesting, right? He said. No, my lord. Arthur managed it, and Rhaenys had no issues. And perhaps sometimes in the future it'll be needed. We may as well do it now while we don't. John said. But it's a dragon, John? He said, and both John and Tyrion laughed at his expense. I told you he was the stupidest Lannister, John. Tyrion said, making them both laugh more. Tyrion, aye, up there, he said, shaking his head. Jamie, it's like nothing you've ever imagined, trust me. You'll love it, and it's safe. As John said, he's done it with Arthur, and this is something I'd like to share with you. Tyrion said, and so he nodded his agreement. Later that night, as they stood on the beach, he saw the dragons come from their cave and felt the nervousness rise once again. John reached out and touched him on the shoulder before walking over to speak to Rhaenys, and then led him to the dragon, showing him how to climb up and where to sit. Once he was sure he was set, John looked to Tyrion and nodded before turning back to him. Hold on, my lord. John said before speaking in Valyrian, and then they were taking off into the air. The feeling of flying was like nothing he could ever describe. It was far different to being on a horse, the sheer power of the dragon beneath them making it incomparable. Though they never reached the full speed or did anything other than fly smoothly, Jaime could see just how much a dragon could do by looking at his brother. While Jon flew straight, Tyrion took turns and dives. He flew fast under and over them, Jaime almost feeling his brother's happiness from where he sat. "He's showing off for you," he heard Jon say, his voice softer than he thought it may have to be up here. "Is it safe?" he asked. "Aye. He's come along well. You wish to try that?" he said, watching as Tyrion did an almost loop. "No, I'm happy with this," he said, and could only guess that Jon was smirking in front of him. After some time, he got more and more used to it and had Jon fly a little faster, stunned by just how quicker Rhaenys was than Lygaron. He was grateful when they landed, though, happy to be back on solid ground, and despite enjoying the flight, he was hopeful that he'd not need to take another. Tyrion walked into the cave with the dragons, and he and Jon stayed on the beach, looking out at the water as it moved in and out. "I'm sorry," Jon said after a few moments of quietness. "For the wedding, I should have told you. I wished you there. I want you to know that, but I got caught up in a dream." "A dream?" "Good Queen Alysanne and Jaehaerys the Conciliator. You know the story?" "Some, but what? Wait, they married in secret?" "Their advisors tried to stop them, and so they married in secret. I got caught up in it, and I wanted, me and Marge." "I'm sorry, Jaime," Jon said, looking at him. "I'm not mad at you, Jon. I was upset." "Aye, but I'm not mad at you." You?" Jon stuttered before composing himself. "Jon, did Arthur tell you of Maya, of what I saw and what she told me?" Jon asked. "He did," Jaime said. "He didn't fully understand it, but in a way he did also. In another life, my father would have been Prince Daeron, son of Prince Duncan. In this, it was Prince Rhaegar, and for a time to me, it was Ned Stark," Jon said. "I know it's hard, Jon, but each of them loved you, I'm sure. 3 fathers. I've seen Jaime, and none were the father I choose. None of them are you," he said, and Jaime gasped. "Rhaegar is my father, and I'd not change that. He's who my mother loved, and I'm proud to be his son. But you're the father I've known, the father who's raised me, and the father I wish to be like." "Jon," he said, and felt Jon's hand reach out and touch him on the arm. "Thank you, Father, for everything," Jon said before walking away. He ended up staying for some time alone, just watching the waves, until Tyrion walked over to him. Jon had gone to spend the night with the dragons, and he and his brother walked back into the keep in silence. Whether Tyrion knew what Jon had said and was giving him time, or just that his brother was being quiet, he knew not. They said their goodbyes, and he walked to his room, finding Daisy asleep when he got there. Standing in front of the crib, he looked down at Joanna. His daughter was growing fast, and would hopefully be joined by a brother or sister soon. As he stood there, though he knew she already had a brother, just like he already had a son, he smiled when she woke up and lifted her from the crib before she could begin to cry. Sitting down on a nearby chair as he told her all about his ride on her brother's dragon. "You must have been tired last night," Daisy said as he dressed the next morning. "Why? You drifted off with Joanna in your arms." "Gods, I didn't. Is she hurt? Did I hurt her?" he asked worriedly. "You were asleep only a moment before I put her back in the crib and helped you to bed," Daisy said. "I don't remember any of that," he said, laughing. "Talking to Joanna, aye, but the rest's not a thing." "I know. Come, we have visitors today, do we not?" He nodded, and they made their way to break their fast. Jon was not there, and only arrived a little after they did. When he and Jon looked at each other, he almost expected there to be some awkwardness, and yet there was not. Both of them just nodding and moving on to eat their meal. He, Daisy, and Jon, along with Tyrion and some others, ready to welcome Lord Beric to Casterly Rock. He'd arrived the night before, but had stayed in Lannisport. Jaime had sent a party of his guards bring him to the rock today. Melisandre also stood in the courtyard with her 2 guards, not part of the welcome, but more to show Thoros that she was here. It was the Red Priest who seemed more than keen to speak to the lady when he saw her here, Beric looking surprised to see another Red Priest, but not paying her no mind after that. The Lord was happy to be welcome, though, more so when he asked him to stay at Casterly Rock for the duration of his visit. "Are you sure about this, John?" he asked him later that day. "Melisandre says that while Beric doesn't follow the Red God, he listens to Thoros. Thoros seeks answers. My lord, answers I think I can give him. As for Beric, I'll feel him out, and we'll give him some trade. I won't go too far." "As you say, John. When is Demeric arriving?" "He's to meet the Lion's Tail in Sigard within the week, so next week sometime. You read Richard's notes?" Jamie asked. "Aye. If he deals with Ramsay as he says and he will, then it's for the best. As for Demeric and Roose, that he's a knight may make him different. I need to get a feel for him before we do anything." "Very well, this woman, John?" "Chinvara," John said. "Aye. Why is she coming?" "I don't know, my lord, only that she is. Given that she helped Arthur and Ashara, and it was her sending him to grab those things, it must be important." "Aye, it must be. It's almost time, my lord. The dragons are big enough. People may have seen them or may see them now, so we can't hide them for much longer." "I know. We need to reach out to more people, find out who we have exactly, who we can count on completely, and then make our move," Jamie said. "We will, my lord, soon. Soon, my king." King's Landing, 296 AC. Dolirio. A dozen warehouses and a manse he'd been given for what he'd done in Essos, John Aaron, more than pleased with the results. While he could have simply bought them, that would have raised far more questions than having the hand give them to him. It had in the end cost him more coin, and yet he found it was worth it, as was what he was about to do. While a part of him wished to stay in Essos to actually travel to Goyandrohe and see the dragon for himself, he had work to do. He'd given the Stormcrows the contract, kill the girl by any means necessary, while he'd have preferred the House of Black and White to take the contract. Their price was far too high. The Stormcrows had 500 men. Surely that would be enough, he thought. It was simple to him, though. Daenerys Targaryen must die. The dragons could fly wild for all he cared. If Aegon had his own, then perhaps they'd fly to join their brother. 3 would be an incredible boon, but 1 would be enough, just as long as Daenerys Targaryen didn't bring her 2 to bear. John Connington was right about one thing. The dragons changed things dramatically. "Magister, we'll reach King's Landing on the morrow," the captain of his guards said, interrupting both his thoughts and his meal. "Very good. All is well?" he asked. "All is well," the captain said before leaving and allowing Illyrio to get back to both activities. With Daenerys Targaryen no longer a suitable or potential bride, it gave him leave to pursue other options. Malakwa Magir had a daughter, but the Tigers would never travel so far, which left him with only Westeros to look to. The Stark girl brought him no benefit. Her father would support Robert and not countenance his plans for betraying the Stag King. The Vale, too, would bring him no benefit, leaving the Tyrell and the Martell girls as his only real options. He could bring Dorne to his side without gifting them a marriage. As for House Tyrell, given what he knew of them, they were both an option and not. The risk in being found out when everything was so close was far too great. He could and would reach out to them at the right time, though, make them the offer, and secure Aegon's throne. He finished the rest of the meal and sent for the young girls, eager to sate another appetite. The next morning when they arrived in King's Landing, he prepared to head straight to the Red Keep. His gift to the king was sure to be welcomed. He'd used another of his ships, leaving the bountiful harvest to ply her trade and his arrival to be unnoticed. Far too many were paying attention to his comings and goings these days. All is secure. "All is secure?" he asked the captain, who nodded, and so he climbed into the carriage, and they headed through the city. He was stopped at the gate and had to ask for John Aaron to come personally, telling the man he had brought a gift that would make the king very happy and asking if he could deliver it to him in the throne room. While he looked at him suspiciously, the hand soon agreed, and so he made his way through the keep. He entered to an almost full throne room, Robert and Cersei sitting in pride of place. "Your graces, I have come from Pentos with a gift for you, great king," he said with a large smile. "A gift?" Robert asked, his voice and face excited like a young boy's on his name day. "Something you have sought for a long time, Your Grace," he said as his men brought it in. "I give you Viserys Targaryen, Your Grace, my gift to you," he said as his men ripped the hood off Viserys' face. "Viserys, Viserys. That is my son, Lord Hand. My name is Aerys Targaryen. I am your rightful king. You all should be on your knees bowing to me," Viserys said to loud laughs. "Dragon spawn," Robert shouted loudly as he rose from his throne, and Illyrio smiled to see the look on the king's face. Domeric and Beric arrived within days of each other, and because of that he and Jaime almost had to force Tyrion to leave, both of them telling him that they would deal with this, and that there was nothing for him to do here, certainly nothing as important as what he was going to. So reluctantly his uncle agreed, and after he and Jay spent the night with the dragons, Tyrion arranged to leave in a day or so. Beric didn't come alone, and when Thoros saw not only Melisandre but the two members of the Fiery Hand, he was stunned, Jay quickly arranging for Melisandre to speak to her fellow Red Priest. The last of Beric's immediate circle was his squire, and Jay cursed himself for forgetting that Edric Dane was squiring for his future good uncle. With Cregan and Ashara still at Castamere, they were spared some awkward conversations for now, but they would be arriving back at the Rock before Ned left, and while Jay longed to see Joy, he wondered how to handle this. Arthur felt that his nephew could be trusted to keep it to himself, and saying that it was Beric they needed to bring on side anyway. Something he was trying his best to do now as he and the Lord sparred while the others looked on. "You've gotten better, my lord," he said as he dodged a quick thrust. "I've need to. I still owe you for my defeat, Jon," Beric said, smiling as he parried one of Jon's blows. "So that's why you came, hoping to gain your revenge, my lord," he said with a smirk. "Seeking it, Jon, not hoping," Beric said as he aimed 2 quick blows at him, while a part of him wondered if losing would endear him to Beric or annoy the Lord. The completive spirit he had and his friends looking on didn't allow that. So he began to pick up the pace and saw Beric begin to falter with a riposte as quick as the bolt of lightning on Beric's sigil. Jay disarmed the Lord and a moment later accepted his yield, Beric smiling broadly as he did so. "I thank you, Jon, for not holding back. Lord Jaime's training has paid off, but I'm not sure he could have ever wished for a better student," Beric said as they drank some water. "I thank you, my lord. Perhaps later we can speak on trade?" he asked, and Beric nodded. "Indeed, now go easy on young Ned. Give him some pointers. Jon, he can only benefit from your instruction," Beric said as he took a seat. "Ned, you wish to spar?" he shouted to the young lad who nodded eagerly. Ned was actually more skilled than Beric, and while Jay didn't put in as much effort as he did with the Lightning Lord, he was forced to put in some effort. Winning wasn't his goal, though, and so halfway through he stopped, much to Ned's chagrin, only for the boy to quickly smile when Jay started giving him pointers. He corrected little parts of his stance, showed him how to work more on his footwork, and told him to begin using a heavier sword for practice against the dummies.
"Why, Jon?"
Ned asked when Jay ruffled his hair as they stood in front of a dummy, Jay showing him where and how to strike. "You see my sword," he said, pointing to his thin, sparring sword. "Aye, it's so thin," Ned said, and then blushed when Jay nodded back. The boy's natural shyness, something he would need to work on. "It is, but when I started, Lord Jaime had me practice with a thicker, heavier one. Then when I switched to this, my arm was trained to wield and expect more resistance from the heavier blade. What do you think happened when it found the blade lighter?" he asked. "It made you swing faster?" Ned said, his eyes alight. "It did. Try it for a while and see if it has the same effect for you, Ned." "I will, Jon. Thank you. Can we spar again sometime?" Ned asked nervously. "Aye, we can," he said, and Ned beamed at him, his smile big and bright, and much like their aunt's, Jay thought. Domeric was a different sort. Sparring was something he did because it needed to be done, and even lance work and jousting seemed more something expected than enjoyed by the older boy. Apart from talks of trade and explaining how things worked, Jay found himself almost at a loss as to what it was that interested the boy, until they were eating one night and the bard was playing his harp terribly. "You play Lord Domeric?" Jay asked, looking at the way he scowled at the bard. I do, John. Better than he anyway. Demeric said. You have a harp? He asked, and Demeric nodded before looking at him carefully. You play? Demeric asked, and he nodded. Well, maybe we should play then, my lord. We could provide some better entertainment at least, he said, and Demeric seemed eager for the opportunity. With a nod to Jaime and Tyrion, Jay walked with Demeric to his room, and once he reached it, rushed off to his former one, the harp Jaime had gotten into practice on still being there. Being in the vaults had allowed him to play his father's harp when he wished, and he had taken full advantage as often as he could, happy to hear the sounds come from it. While the one in his hands now was a poor substitute for that one, it would do for now, and so as they made their way back to the hall, he looked forward to playing, leaving the singing out for now at least. They began with songs everyone would know, the Dornishman's Wife, the Bear, and the Maiden Fair, Demeric smiling when Jay suggested Alisan. It was when Jay began to play Brave Danny Flint, though, that Demeric really brightened up, insisting on Iron Lances and finishing with the Winter Maid, both of them feeling the North in them come through as they played. Thank you, John. I've not enjoyed playing so much in an age. You wield that harp as well as you do the blade, Demeric said as they were saying their good nights. Only as good as the partner who played with me, my lord. Jay said, Dom, John, call me Dom, Dom. He spent the night with the dragons, Tyrion spending his final night at the Rock before heading to Dun, the Lion's Tooth soon to be ready to take him to see Arianne. They didn't speak too much on it. Tyrion knew where he stood, and that he had his backing, and there were no more words needed. Instead, Jay telling him that he'd look after Ligeron, and Tyrion promising the dragon he'd not be gone for long, and that when he came back, they'd go on a longer flight. Tyrion had taken to dragon flight as well as he had, keen to be up in the sky even more than being on the ground, Ligeron too eager to be with his rider always. With Rhaenys back, though, his son's loneliness was lessened, and he was far more accepting of Tyrion's departure. I'll be back soon, John, Jaime, Tyrion said, and John nodded, Jaime too knowing just how important this trip was to Tyrion. Go. I'll see you on your return, he said, and gave Jaime and Tyrion a longer moment. The woman in red departing the ship 4 down, grabbing his attention. Nodding to Walder, he, the giant guard, and Ghost made their way to where the woman was standing looking around, her smile when seeing him removing all the worry that just been on her face. My lady, he said softly as he looked at the beautiful woman, his eyes roaming her face as keenly as hers were his. My. Jon Snow? She said, changing her words halfway through, after looking around at the number of people on the docks. I am Lady Kinvara, he asked. Kinvara, Jon, is there somewhere we can speak in private? We have horses awaiting my lady. Can you ride, or would you prefer a carriage? I can ride. We're heading to the Rock? She asked, and he nodded. We are. There is much we must speak on, I believe, he said. Much indeed, she said as he directed her to where Jaime was standing looking at him, Tyrion walking up the gangplank along with Bronn and some more guards. Lord Jaime, this is Lady Kinvara. She'll be accompanying us back to the Rock. Of course, my lady, a pleasure, Jaime said as they turned to walk to their horses. Bear Island, 296 AC. Arya. The journey to Bear Island was almost as exciting to her as the island itself would be once she got there. Nymeria, too, enjoyed the freedom of being able to run through the Wolfswood and of sleeping out under the stars. Lady Mage and her girls were so different than any other lady she knew. She could be strict when she wished to be, and yet she allowed her far more freedom than her father did. She and Lyanna were allowed to sit up late to listen to the stories as they sat around the fire. While they weren't allowed any of the ale, they were given a small mug of hot cider each on one of the colder nights. At no point was she asked to ride in the carriage or to pull her shirt in when it came loose as she rode. Instead, Mage would simply look at her or Lyanna, and she soon found that she began to do it herself, just as Lyanna always seemed to. We'll be arriving at Deepwood Motte on the morrow. No doubt Glover will wish us to stay, and the boats won't be here for a day or so either, so you two, Mage said, looking to her and Lyanna. Will behave, she said, and Arya found herself nodding. Deepwood. Mort was made of wood. That was her only thought as they were led through the outer rings, each one taking them higher and higher into the keep itself. Lord Galbart was a gruff man, but friendlier than his brother, and Arya found herself liking him far better, especially when she found out about Lawrence being his ward. The bastard boy and how he was treated, making her think fondly on her brother. "You spar?" She asked Lawrence early the next morning, and he nodded, running off to find some sparring blades. "To 3?" he asked when he came back, and she nodded eagerly. Though he beat her 2-1, she had done well, and it was his size and strength which had forced her to lose, nothing else. Lyanna and she broke there fast with Lawrence, Arya showing him the knife her father gifted her and the bow Jon had made for her, and Lyanna doing likewise, all three of them laughing and japing as they ate. When she left the next day, she was a little sad to go, though Maze told her that they'd be coming back and forth to Deepwood Motte a fair bit in her time on Bear Island. Despite the keep almost being ready for them to stay in, and the fact that Mage and her girls stayed there already, it was to the main keep on Bear Island they were taken. They'd be staying there for the first moon until more work was done, and only then move to the keep near the docks. Arya found that Lyanna seemed just as miffed as she was by this, though soon they cared not, both of them more eager to play with Gerald than anything else. "Tomorrow you'll begin your lessons with Maester Alaric," Lynessi said as they sat down to eat that night, Arya nodding when she saw both Meg and Lyanna look to her. "No sept?" she asked a moment later, just to be sure. "We follow the true gods here, Arya. No septa will set foot on Bear Island," Lynessi said. And Arya was about to bring up that Lynessi was from the south when she thought better of it. Besides, if it meant she didn't have to suffer a septa, then who was she to complain? Sitting in the lessons the next morning with Lyanna, she certainly wasn't going to complain. The maester taught them sums and then began to speak on the history of the North, the northern houses, and the wars fought here. Though not as good a storyteller as El, he was good enough, Arya thought, and she enjoyed the lesson a lot. The next one even more, as she and Lyanna were put through their paces by Lyra and Jory. Archery, swords, even wielding a mace. Arya was exhausted when they finally finished, eating her dinner that night and falling asleep almost as soon as she hit the pillow. She soon found herself creeping carefully through the woods, avoiding caves because of the smell that came from them, the knowledge that something lived in those caves keeping her away. The deer didn't see her coming, and when she pounced it was taken down quickly, the meat tender against her tongue, and she swallowed hungrily. "Arya, Arya, wake up." She heard Lyanna shake her awake, and she immediately jumped up and tried to spit the taste of the blood from her mouth. "What is it?" she asked as she drank down some water. "You missed breaking your fast. God, you were tired." Lyanna smirked. "Does that mean I won't be fed?" she asked worriedly. "What? Of course not. Come." "I waited," Lyanna said, and Arya smiled as she dressed, both of them eating their meal together. They went riding that day, and Arya was able to take them to where Nymeria had killed the deer. It was clear the carcass had been torn apart by something bigger than the wolf, though. "Bears we should ride on," Alisane said, and Megan nodded. "There's a cave a little bit up to the left. They're in there," Arya said, and Mage looked at her oddly. "You saw them?" Mage asked. "Smelt them," she said, and Magi smirked. "You and your wolf are going to enjoy it here, Arya, child," she said as they rode on. Arya couldn't agree with her more. She already was. This was what she had wished for all her life. A friend and people who didn't judge her for how she was or who she was. As they rode back to the keep, she looked to Lyanna, who nodded, and soon they were both racing over the ground, the sound of their laughter matched by the laughs from Meg and her girls behind her. Yes, she would enjoy it here. She felt that she let her horse jump over a fallen tree. Essos 26 AC. Shh. Danny. The dreams came every night. She was in the air, flying over lands she didn't recognize, a worrying thought in her head. She was alone, scared, and worried she'd never find the others. But she flew on and on, east, always east. It was almost a week into it that she managed to see it more clearly, see that it wasn't Elegon. She rode on it with Sandorix, and it was then she spoke to Shiera on it. "I see him fly, but he's behind us, not ahead. We're going in the wrong direction," she said as they broke their fast. Are you him? Shiera asked. No, I'm me. I can feel me, but I can feel his worry, his concern. It's like sometimes with Elegon, only it's different, she said. Different, Shiera asked. Lesser. With Elegon, it feels more real. With Sandorix, it's like being really sleepy, like a dream, but not a dream. She looked to Shiera, expecting to see her look at her as if she was mad. I feel it with Rhaegal too. It's hard to explain. I think you did it better than I can, but it's like I can feel what he feels sometimes. Should we turn back? She asked. It's up to you, Dany. We're following your lead. Where are we? Is there a city near? Korth is a few moons away, I'd imagine, but Hesh, Lahosh, or Khazrak can't be more than a week or so away. Shiera said, We need supplies. We should go to a city before turning back. She said, and Shiera nodded. They told Sandor of their decision, and despite his grumbling, they made their way to the nearest of the Lazar cities, Missy telling all about the Lezarine they rode, how the Dothraki called them lamb men, and how they were preyed upon by those stronger than them. They were riding one day when the dragons got excited, and by the time Dany and the rest had come across them, they found the reason why. The herd had scattered, but a lot of them hadn't been lucky enough, and both Elegon and Rhaegal had feasted on the sheep. The closer they got to the city, the more she began to worry about the dragons, so she and Shiera spoke to them and asked them to feed further away for now, to not come too close to the city. Elegon wasn't happy with this, Rhaegal either, but they listened, and Dany watched sadly as they flew off to the west, back to where they had found the sheep earlier. It's for the best, Dany. They're still growing, and until we fly with them, we can't truly control them. Shiera said, You think they'll accept us both? She asked, knowing in her heart that Elegon would accept her, but feeling happy at the thought that Rhaegal too would have a rider. I do. I can feel him almost willing me to accept it, Shiera said with a smile. Sandor and Grey Worm seemed to have built up a good relationship too by the time they arrived at Hesh, the gruff Sandor and the stoic Grey Worm being complete opposites, not seeming to be an obstacle at all, though she did notice that Sandor was quieter and more sullen on this trip than ever. This was why, not long after they arrived, she and Shiera organized a treat for him. Noticing the chickens on their way into the town and how Sandor looked longingly at them, she, Missy, and Shiera, along with Musador, Marceline, and some of the other Unsullied who served as her guards, bought as many as the man was willing to sell. That night, as they sat down to eat in the large open space they'd taken up, she and Shiera carried the dishes out, placing them in front of the now happier Sandor. Did you not make any for anyone fucking else? He said, and she saw Missy look worriedly at him. No, this is all for you, so fucking eat it and shut the fuck up, you greedy fucker, she said, smirking when he grabbed a leg of chicken and began to eat greedily. She saw Missy breathe a sigh of relief, the girl being so conditioned to keeping her masters happy that she didn't know how to react around someone who was angry, even if that anger was not directed at her. The girl was getting better, though, understanding more, but well, Sandor confused even her at times. Dany thought with a giggle. Looking to him, she saw him lick his fingers happily. It took them almost a week to gather the supplies in Hesh, Dany offering to use her gold to pay for it, and Shiera objecting, before Sandor swooped in and used his own. See, it's simple. You pay the man, and then you fucking leave, he said as he walked past them, both of them trying not to laugh until he was gone from their sight. They bought carts, tents, food, and horses, the Unsullied able to ride instead of walk, and so they would be able to make better time. Soon, they were leaving Hesh behind them and heading east. The road was smooth and the travel quick, Dany happy to be heading in what she felt was the right direction. By the time they reached the dragons, the herd she suspected was long gone, and she felt bad for the shepherd, though he was nowhere to be seen. At one point on their journey, she noticed Missy getting nervous, though the girl would say nothing to her about what was on her mind. Later that night, as they bathed in the nearby river, she helped Missy dry herself and asked her what was wrong, the girl again saying nothing for quite some time. Have I displeased you, Dany? Missy finally said softly. What? No, of course not. Why would you think that? She asked, horrified that she may be the reason for Missy's quietness. "We travel to Marine. You are bringing me back to Master Kresny's," Missy said, looking down to the ground. Missy, look at me, please," she said, and the girl looked up. "You are free, Missy. No one, not me, nor any master, decides your fate anymore." "I did not know this was that road. Truly I did not. We shall leave it on the morrow, I swear it," she said, and the girl hugged her tightly, the smile on her face almost breaking her heart. "Thank you, Danny," Missy said the next day when she directed them to head north from now on. That night she dreamt again of being in the air, this time, though she recognized where she was, Norvos, and heading east. Her son was coming towards her and she him, north. She must go north, she thought, and when she woke the next morning it was further north they headed. The Wall 296 AC, Benjen. He had found nothing out in the wilds. The wildlings raided when they did and moved quickly, and on this ranging, it had been strange. He had felt as if he was being watched, and yet whatever it was never came close to him. Frost gave him a sense of protection he'd not had before. He could rest easy at night, he ate better, and he moved with less worry. Though whether the wolf scared the wildlings away or there was something else going on, Benjen couldn't be sure which, only that he encountered none of them no matter how far he rode. Bypassing Crastus on the way back for a variety of reasons, not needing the man's food or protection, not liking what he saw there, and Frost needing to almost be held back from gutting the man, Benjen soon found himself in Whitetree. He and the people there had always had a good relationship, and seeing him with Frost it seemed to have, if anything, gotten better. Dropping off the extra deer he had caught, he was given ale and soup and Frost, and he slept indoors by a warm fire that night. They left early the next morning and arrived at the wall a day or so later, the horn blowing once to announce his return. "How fared you out there, Benjen?" Sir Alistair asked as he helped stable his horse. "There's nought out there, Alistair. Moons. I traveled and found nothing, not a sign," he said, and Alistair nodded. "Well, at least you returned hale and hearty. Aemon wishes to speak to you." The knight whispered, and he nodded, slapping the man on the back, as he and Frost went to make his report to the Lord Commander first. Among the many things he needed to thank his nephew for was the difference in Alistair Thorne. He had been aghast when Aemon had told him that Alistair and Jeremy knew the truth. Even more so when he heard that Jon had promised to pardon them when crowned, only for Aemon to explain why the men should be pardoned and why their nephew needed to do it. Since then, though the man had gone out of his way to be friendly, he'd become a better trainer to the new recruits also, showing them a far different hand than he used to. Aemon had said the man had been bitter at his lot in life, and seeing him now, he could tell that was true. Jon had changed that, though. Knocking at the Lord Commander's door, he made his report and cursed what he told him, accepting it before heading to the maester's rooms. "Is that you, Benjen?" Aemon said as soon as he and Frost walked into the room. "Aye, Aemon, it's me," he said, and was about to ask how he knew when he saw Aemon reach out to rub Frost's neck, the wolf's footsteps having given him away. "This is Marwyn, and the quiet man in the corner is Loa Mara. They are here at Jon's request, Benjen." "Agree," Aemon said, letting him now he could speak freely. "For what?" he asked. "We seek answers about the long night. Benjen are directed to do so," Marwyn said, and Aemon nodded. "Our nephew has a request for you also," Aemon said, handing him the note. He opened it eagerly, almost ripping it, so keen was he to see what Jon had wrote. The note, though, was brief and to the point. "Uncle Benjen, I need to find out if there are any books on the long night in Winterfell, any information that may help in the future. When next you return, I suggest you bring Aemon with you, together with Maester Luwin. I think it may be helpful if you search for such works. Marwyn and Loa Mara will continue their work in Castle Black until you return. I wish you luck. Uncle and I count the days until can travel north once more. Your nephew, Jon. It seems you and I are going on a trip, Benjen." Aemon chuckled. It was almost a week later when Jor gave permission for Aemon to leave the wall. Not only did he find it curious, but he thought it a liberty, what with him leaving also to cover for Ned's trip to the moat. That the trip his brother was taking was to protect the North being the only reason for him allowing him to leave once again, something he almost refused when he found out Aemon would be leaving too. "I like this. Not. Your duties are here, both of you," Jor said. "Aye, they are, Lord Commander. But should I wish to travel to the Citadel, you cannot stop me. I'm sworn to the Watch." "Aye, but I'm a maester first and foremost. What would you do were I recalled?" Aemon said, and Benjen hid the smirk at Jor's annoyed look. "You think that a good tactic, Aemon, telling me how powerless I am to stop you?" Jor grumbled. "I think at times, Lord Commander, you forget the needs of the Order come before the desires of any man. You could deny Benjen, of course, but you risk upsetting the Warden of the North. As for me, I leave on the morrow," Aemon said as he walked from the room. "By the old gods, I don't know what's gotten into him," Jor said, shaking his head. "I think he wishes for the trip, Lord Commander. After all he's done for us, who are we to deny him a little something for himself?" he said, and Jor nodded. "Aye, you have the right of it. Tell Ned no more for a year at least. Aemon is right. I can't refuse the Warden of the North, but I'll not have people think I play favorites," Jor said. "Perished the thought," he said before he looked at the old bear, and they began to laugh. "Joe, before I change my fucking mind," Jor said, and Benjen nodded. Their escort was something else, Sir Jeremy volunteering and Jor accepting, Ed being allowed to join and grumbling about not being able to sleep without an ice wall to lean on. A half-dozen brothers to accompany the maester, each of them looking forward to being housed in Winterfell for a moon or more. For Aemon, though, each day they traveled it was as if he was getting younger and younger. The enthusiasm he showed for every aspect of their days on the road was incredible. He laughed more, joked more. Around the fire at night he told tales of the Targaryen kings, and it was only at the men's reaction, other than Ed who just groused, that Benjen realized these were loyalists. Hand-picked men, those who'd been sent for serving his nephew's house, and those that Jon wished to free when he was crowned. Egg was a good man, let no one say different, and a good king, Aemon said, and Benjen saw the nods. "Aye, that he was," Jeremy said. "One day, should we be lucky, we may see another in our lifetime," Aemon said, and blind and not Benjen saw him look to him. "Should we be lucky?" Benjen said to Ayes. "That counts me out. I'm never lucky," Ed said to loud laughs. He felt excited when he saw Winterfell in the distance and chuckled when Frost looked at him and waited for his nod. Once getting it, the wolf was gone and covered the ground far quicker than they would. Arriving at the courtyard, he found Ned and Lady Janelle waiting to greet them, Sir Roderick, Jory, and Harwin with them, along with Maester Luwin, who looked excitedly at Aemon. "Welcome back, brother," Ned said as he embraced him warmly. "Back, I feel like I've not left," he said to laughs. "Lady Kierwin, an honor," he said, and she shook his head. "You've known me since I was a girl, and I've just got through with telling you to call me El. Benjen Stark," she said. "El, Ned, may I introduce Maester Aemon," he said, and saw Ned reach out to the old maester. "Maester, I'm honored to welcome you to Winterfell," Ned said. "I'm honored to be welcomed, Lord Stark," Aemon said. "Come, I'm sure you'll all wish to get settled and have something warm in your bellies," Ned said as they walked into the keep, Luwin helping Aemon navigate his way. Disputed. Lands 296 AC. Tor Hen Snow. 1,000 men he had with him on foot. Brandon in charge of the 500 cavalry. Artos, the 100 archers with Hugo left in Myr, in charge of the rest of the men. Almost half the company he had brought with him to wipe out the brave companions. Way too many men, as both Brandon and Artos had said, but better too many than too few. Given the coin the Lannisters were paying, they'd bought the entire company, so Torhen felt they should get their coin's worth. The march was slow and unhurried. He knew exactly where they would set up, and only needed to arrive there a few days before the brave companions passed through. Though not as disciplined marchers as the Golden Company, his men were like the Unsullied when compared to Hote's. They camped by the stream and went over their plans once again. Artos would have the high ground, and he and Brandon would box them in. Once they had done their job, his own would finish it. His men were in good spirits, none of them questioning his orders or thinking twice about what they were about to do. After Kevin had left, Torrin had set Hugo to work, both on finding out the location of the brave companions and on what had happened to the Lannister men. He spoke true. Torrin, Northmen fell also. Hugo said. And what he said of Jon Snow, Torrin asked. The lad's well thought of both in the west and the north. The mermen and the Lannisters are the only ones with those giant ships. The mermen's flagship is named the Western Wolf after the lad. And he helps the north still? Mormont, Umber, Glover, Stark, Karstark, Manderley, and even Bolton earn coin from these deals. Aye, he helps the north, and there's something else. Hugo said, smiling. What? Direwolves, Torrin. The lad brought direwolves back to the north. Each of the Stark children has one, even Stark himself, and the lad's own is a white wolf with red eyes, Hugo said. The old gods have spoken? Brandon said, looking at them both. The old gods have spoken, Torrin said, smiling. Once word had spread through his ranks that Northmen had fallen to Holt, that was it. Had he not accepted this contract, then he'd have faced a challenge. When word had spread that the contract came from the White Wolf, he'd have been gutted, not replaced, had he turned it down. As it was, he'd only reinforced his own position. He only hoped that he'd set this up right and wouldn't lose too many men this day. Artos lined up his archers on each side of the pass. At the end of it, he and his infantry took up their positions. The stakes were planted and his men held their shields ready. A few miles down from him, ready to block off the escape and drive them towards him, Brandon and his cavalry waited. Standing there, his greatsword in his hand, he looked behind him, the lookout poised and waiting for the signal. The hours stretched on, the sun beaming down on them, forcing his men into swallowing their water and eating their meat and hardtack. Far behind him, 50 men guarded their supplies, and once this was done, they'd eat well. For now, it was time to wait. When the whistle came, he raised his hand, and those at the front held their spears out. The front line was as close to an unsullied phalanx as his men did, and it would be more than enough. We are of the North, and these men killed our brothers. The North remembers. He said to silence, the men not giving their positions away, and Torrin smiled when he heard the horses in front of him. Artos, no. These men were poor marchers. They almost strolled and made so much noise it was annoying. Looking down at the carts and cages, he shook his head. Bears, exotic animals, and prisoners. Holt's reputation for torture all on show. He could feel the disgust from his men as they too looked down. These men had killed their countrymen, and their bowstrings were now taut and ready to let loose on his order. Artos waited, though. He wanted as many to fall here as possible, to limit what Torrin and his men would face. Not that he feared his commander would have any trouble, even were he to face them all. Still, it was his job to take out as many as he could with his men, and he'd see his job done. When he felt the time was right, he gave the order, his hand raised in a fist, and then he turned it in the air, the arrows flying as one. He aimed his own arrows at those who were around the edges, using them to box them and even more. Below him, screams rang out, and horses, bears, men, all made panic noises, and even as they did so, the arrows fell. The group soon split, some racing forward and others turning to go back. All the while, he and his men fired, and below, then, more men died. Brandon Snow. They lined up 3 abreast, lances at the ready, and waited for the signal. He'd watched as the brave companions marched by them, not even bothering to send scouts ahead, or to check their sides or rear. Were he dealing with better forces, he'd have sought a much better hiding place. As it was, if Holt had sent scouts over the hill and into the trees, they'd have seen him. Once the last of the men had passed him, he and his began to move out, the horses walking as they lined up to make their charge. When the flaming arrow was seen, they began to trot, and were soon in a canter, and finally a gallop. They would cut through whatever was in front of them easily, he knew. He'd seen heavy cavalry charge, and also the Dothraki's version. His men were neither, truth be told, they were truly infantry on horseback. But here in Essos they were extremely effective. They wouldn't charge unsullied and break their lines, nor would they be a match for Dothraki on an open field, but against the forces they usually faced, they were more effective than any other cavalry would be. Feeling his mare's eagerness to be let fully go, he did so, and dropped his own lance down. The first men they encountered were riding away from the fight. Some had arrows in them, and he almost felt sorry for them when they tried to pull their horses up, almost. His front line cut through them as if they were nothing, their own momentum adding to his attack, lances almost ripping them apart from the impact. He felt the crushing of bones beneath his mare's hooves, and yet she never slowed, just kept racing forward. By the time they reached the main group, most were already dead or had moved forward towards Torrhen. Few were on horseback, and fewer yet were uninjured. Artos had done his job well, and Brandon felt proud of his brother. Men were rode down as they tried to get out of the way. Others simply rode over, and just as he'd commanded the rear 100 stopped and began to form up. Above him, Artos and his archers began to move along the top of the cliffs toward Torrhen. Forward. He shouted, and they began to move again. The time had come to end this. Torrhen, the sound of death was all around him. Men crying out in pain, horses making their worry and pain clear. Them he felt sorry for, the men riding them not so much. Artos had done his job well, and he knew Brandon would by now be behind them. A little over 50 men had rode towards them, and they rode so hard they'd not been able to stop. His shield wall easily held, and there would be no second charge to face this day. He gave the order, and his men began their work. The wall opened as his men stormed through. Those who'd managed to stay a horse soon were unable to. His men pulling them down, and their axes, maces, swords, and halberds doing their deadly work. He moved through them looking for a worthy opponent, his greatsword not finding any, as it cut through men as if they were nothing. By the time he found Hoat, the man was already injured, unable to fight, and trying to crawl away. Torrhen. Hoat gasped as he spat out blood from his mouth. "Bargo," he said, moving towards him. "Why?" Hoat asked, and Torrhen didn't answer, instead having the man dragged from where he was. Around him, his men went about their work, and he heard the sounds of Brandon's cavalry slowing down. Artos, and then the rest of their men arrived. It took them an hour to make sure that every last brave companion was dead, some of his men enjoying their work even more when they saw the state of some of the prisoners Hoat kept caged up. Men were mutilated, and the girls terrified. Torrhen ordering that some of Hoat's gold be given to them, and they be allowed ride back to Myr with them should they wish. He, Brandon, and Artos walked to where they had Hoat tied up, the man looking at him still clueless as to what he'd done to bring them down upon him. A part of Torrhen wished to send him to the black goat he worshipped like that. But in the end, he told him, "You pulled on the lion's tail, Hoat, and killed Northmen when you did so. Did you not think there would be a reckoning?" he said, and Hoat looked at him. The Iron Bank was my employer. They will avenge me," Hoat said, and all three of them laughed. Even were it true that they would not. But it wasn't the Iron Bank who gave you this contract. They make far too much gold from the lions to do so, Brandon said. "The fat man. I can take you to him?" Hoat pleaded. "The fat man is not our concern, Hoat," Artos said. He had the man dragged to the small wooden box that would have to do for now, and leaned his head over it, raising his greatsword. He got ready to pass sentence. "For crimes against the North and its allies, I sentence you to die," he said as he raised his sword. "The White Wolf sends his regards," he said as he took the man's head. White Harbor, Rob. He and Grey Wind had been off on a hunt with Sir Wendell and some of the others when he learned of the plan to travel to the west. Each day it came closer. He found himself more and more excited for the journey. That Winifred was coming with him only making him happier for it. Since the betrothal had been confirmed, they had become ever closer. He had reluctantly, as had she made sure he did, kept to his word and behaved like a gentleman, though their kisses grew ever more passionate. His training had come along even more. On his last visit to Braavos, he had met with Syrio again and offered him the chance to come to White Harbor and even to Winterfell to help train him or their men. the first sword refusing, but suggesting that in the future anything was possible. Robb found one lesson with Syrio was the equivalent of months of training with anyone else. If he had him training him full-time, he knew there'd be no limit on how good he could become. But only Syrio could decide that coin or pleas didn't work on the man. He did as he wished, and Robb was just grateful to have any chance to work with him at all. While in Braavos, he had negotiated his first trade deal, a sale of wood to Norvos, and both Wylis and Wyman were happy with his efforts. Winifred, too, was proud of him when she heard. He'd even written of it to his father and mother, though he had received no replies as of yet. "Have you not packed yet?" Winifred said as they were standing in his room. "We're not leaving for days, Winifred," he said as she laughed. "Boys," she said with a snort. "Oh, let me guess, my perfect future wife is already packed and ready to go." He chuckled. "This is your perfect future good sister," Winifred said, laughing. "I'll pack today," he said, and she kissed his cheek. Dinner that night made his packing even more hurried. It would be just one more day they'd have in White Harbor, and not the 3 or 4 he had thought he'd have. The next day he spent both packing and searching for gifts to bring with him. One for John and one for Cragen, another for Ashara. While he'd not spent much time with his aunt or cousin, he had enjoyed what time he did spend with them and was looking forward to more. When Wyman told them they'd be stopping off in Braavos for a day or two, both Winifred and Willa became even more excited about the trip, both girls asking him to show them around while they were there. Robb feeling happy that he would be able to, that he knew enough of the place to show them some of the more interesting stalls while they'd be there. Standing on the Merman's Trident a day or so later, he wondered what the West was like. John seemed to love it, and in a way, his brother was more northern than he, or had been at least. Yet he spoke so fondly of Lannisport and the Rock that Robb wondered what it was he liked so much. Was it the place itself, or the people who lived there? He was eager to find out, and to see where his brother had spent the past few years of his life. "Father wishes to speak to you, Robb," Willa said, and he nodded and followed her below deck. "Did he say what about?" he asked, and Willa shook her head. "Winifred still unwell?" he asked. "She's better, just tired," Willa said, smiling to Robb's relief. "You're looking forward to seeing the West?" he asked. "Very much so. I want to see how different it is, to see how they do things. Plus, I may get someone to dance with," she said, rolling her eyes at him. "I'd dance with you," he said, pretending to be affronted. "You call that dancing?" She giggled as she moved out of his way when he went to bump against her. "I'll remember that when next you're sitting alone," he said, and she laughed. "I never sit alone, Robb," she said, almost skipping away from him. He was still smiling when he walked into Lord Wyman's cabin, the Lord looking inquisitively at him and then smirking when he bid him sit. "My daughter feeling better, is she?" Wyman asked. "Willa says she is, just tired and resting," he said. "Good. I wish to speak to you about this trip, Robb. I know you wish to spend time with your brother, and I'll see you do, but I also want you to be with me when I speak to Kevin and to Lord Jamie. To sit with me when I discuss the trade deals," Wyman said. "Of course, my lord," he said. "You've come along a lot, Robb. It's time you learned even more, so think of this as the first chance of that. I'll give you time with the girls in Braavos. It's more a check on things I'm there for, but once we're in the West, when I work, you work, understand?" "I do, my lord, thank you." "Good. Now come, let's eat," Wyman said. And Robb smiled as he followed the lord to the cabin for their meal. Winifred was up and about the next day. His betrothed was a little unsteady on her feet, but feeling better, and so he spent most of the day on deck with her and Willa, doing his best to ensure she was comfortable. When they reached Braavos, both girls stared in awe at the Titan, Robb finding himself in the role that Wendell had been on his visits, soon explaining what it was and how it worked. They stayed only 2 days in the city, and he never got to see Syrio. He did, however, get to buy some presents in the stalls, and Willa especially was excited by some of the things she was able to buy, watching as the Titan faded into the background, though Robb could only smile. When next they stopped, he'd be in the West, and he'd see his brother again. King's Landing 296 AC, Seb Barristan. He had been off duty when it happened, Sir Aris telling him later on what he'd seen, how the king had needed to be pulled off the Ceres and had almost strangled him where he'd stood. Only John Aaron being able to get through to the man and to make him see sense, Viserys was carried to the cells rather than walked to them. Barristan, though, was at a loss what to do. It was hours until he was to be back at his post, and so he couldn't go there and see for himself just yet. Instead, he headed to the tavern to speak to Richard's man. He needed direction, a plan. Was he to rescue the prince? Were others to do so? What did his king wish him to do? What was the right thing to do? All these thoughts raced through his head as he practically did the same through the streets. He was almost out of breath by the time he arrived at the tavern and had to wait some time for Richard's man to arrive. "Come," the man said as he moved up the stairs, Barristan following behind him. "You heard?" he said when they entered the room, the door quickly closing behind him. "I heard. What are we to do?" he asked, and the man shook his head. "Elaine is not back yet. He won't be for some time. He's sailing and so can't be reached." What do we do?" he asked, and the man shook his head again, his confusion as clear as Barristan's was. "I've sent a message west, hopefully. An answer will come or Elaine will arrive back before the king tries again." "He really tried to kill him in the throne room?" Barristan asked, shocked. 4 men it took to drag him off, sir. One got a busted lip. Had the Falcon not been there, then it'd be too late already." And felt his disgust rise, and though they talked some more, it was soon clear they were going around in circles. Richard's man had no idea what to do, and Barristan couldn't fault him, as he too was lost on this. Heading back to White Sword Tower, he changed and got ready to go on duty, finding himself for once glad he was to guard the king. The mood in the Red Keep was strange. Some were giddy that the dragon was in chains. Others seemed either shocked by what the king had done or what he would do. As for Robert, there had been few times that Barristan had seen him in a better mood, and fewer times over the years when he'd wished for nothing more than to just take his knife and plunge it into his belly. You heard. We have him, Sir Barristan. Viserys fucking Targaryen. As mad as his father, we have him, and by the gods I'll enjoy taking his head myself," Robert said happily when Barristan relieved Sir Aerys, his brother seeming just as happy to get away from the king's company. "I have heard rumors, your grace," he said, trying to keep composed. "Rumors, huh? It's no fucking rumor, Barristan. He's in my fucking dungeon thanks to my good friend Illyrio," Robert said, draining a mug of ale. "That's good news, your grace," he said, and saw Robert turn and look warily at him. "It is, isn't it, for me anyway? But is it truly good news for you?" he asked, and Barristan knew he was on shaky ground. "Your grace?" he asked with mock confusion. "Don't be coy, Barristan. I know where your loyalties lay," Robert said. "I swore an oath and have never broken one in my life, your grace, nor would I now." "Good. I'll have no one gainsay me on this. The Dragonspawn will lose his head." "As you say, your grace." He knew he needed to see him, to find out if it was truly Viserys, and to try and figure out what to do, how to get him free from here. It seemed he wouldn't have to wait long to find out the first part. Robert keen to go visit the Dragonspawn in his cage, as he called him, laughing as they walked down to the dungeons. When they got there, he saw that any plan he would have to rescue Viserys was a non-starter. The guards had been trebled. Almost 50 men now guarded this place, and it would take an army to get past them. "Look at him, Barristan. The man who would be king," Robert said, laughing, and Barristan looked into the cell. Viserys was chained to the wall, and as soon as he saw them, he began to rant and rave, the words coming out of his mouth filling Barristan with dread. "Sir Barristan, I am your king. I order you to release me, and to place the usurper in chains. I shall see him burn. I'll see you all burn." Viserys said, "Burn in my name, in the name of Aerys Targaryen. I'll burn you all." "Greerian," Viserys said before laughing. The sound was as familiar to him as the rhetoric, and he shook his head trying to make the image disappear. Straggly hair, long nails, scabs everywhere. Looking again, he could see that while Viserys was not Aerys, he had not strayed far off his path, and as they walked away and Robert laughed once again, he found himself wondering what it was he should do. Casterly Rock, 296 AC. J. Harris Targaryen. Thoros was shocked to see Kinvara, far more so than he had been when he saw Melisandre and her guards. Jay asking her to speak to the Red Priest before he spoke to her himself, wishing to have her add to Melisandre's own take on Thoros before he spoke to him. Instead, he spent some time with Demeric, going over the trading deals and telling him some things which would benefit House Bolton even more, things which would come across as Demeric's ideas. He helped him so much that Demeric got suspicious as to his motives, and Jay was forced to speak to him a little more clearly. So asking him to go with him to the Godswood, the two of them walked and sat down in front of the Ross weirwood tree. "It's pitiful," Dom said, looking at the gnarled tree. "Still a weirwood, though, and here in the south they're few and far between." "Aye, you got that right. Even in the Vale there are only one or two." "The home of the Andals, you don't say," he said as they both chuckled. "John." "Aye. I know, these deals, Dom. They're not part of some plan to force you to do something. They're more, your father is a complicated man," he said, and Dom nodded. "He is. Our houses are allies, and yet this was not always the case. Wars have been fought, and while there is no enmity now, it may not always be that way," he said. "My father won't rebel, John," Demeric said, affronted. "Not if we don't give him a reason to, Dom," he said, and Demeric nodded. "You wish to buy loyalty? Loyalty is only earned. Dom, all I'm doing is trying my best to show the benefits of it," he said, and Demeric nodded before laughing. "What? You're not what I expected, John. It's benefited you coming here, the North too, and now my house also. Has it not benefited you going to the Vale?" "Aye, it has," Demeric said, looking down and then back up. "I had someone there, met someone I cared deeply for, but it could never be," Demeric said sadly. "Why not? My father will seek another match for me, one more advantageous." "Will he?" John said before shaking his head when Demeric went to speak. "Who was she?" "John, I'd rather not speak of her name," Demeric said, and Jay looked at him and saw just how hard it was for him to bring her up. "I found it best to seek what you want, to reach for it. Forget your father for a moment, if you could. If it were up to you, then, would you wish this girl?" he asked. "John." "I can't, my father. Forget your father for a moment at least. If it was your choice," Jay asked. "Aye. Then perhaps I could help," he said, and Dom looked at him as if he was mad. "Let me try," he said, and Dom nodded. Both of them knelt and prayed before they headed back to the keep. Miranda Royce was the girl in Demeric's heart. Jay deciding he'd speak with Jamie and Jenna on her and find out from Richard what he could. He'd learn one thing, though. Demeric would be a far better lord than his father was. Later that day he met with Beric. The trade deal he and Jamie offered him being most welcome to the Lord, and even Arthur approved of it. Jay had worried that the knight may see him play someone who would be marrying into his family, and yet Arthur had said it was better. The man was on the right side than the wrong one. Jamie agreeing, saying that houses who fought against you needed to be seen to be treated as such. So if he could keep Blackhaven out of the war, or better yet an ally, then it was all for the best. "I thank you for this, my lord. You too, John," Beric said when they signed the deal. "Think nothing of it. I wish you and your betrothed all the best, my lord," Jamie said. "Aye, me too, Lord Beric." He added both Beric and Ned, smiling. "Come, Ned, let's go find whatever tavern Thoros is in. It's time we made our arrangements," Beric said, standing up, shaking Jamie's and then his hand. He did the same to Ned before promising the lad he'd spar once more with him before he left. The boy's smile, true and almost stuck to his face when he left. Once they'd gone, he turned to Jamie, who seemed happy enough with the deal. They'd given him favorable terms, allowing him to make even more coin, though they'd not lose out either. "A good deal, John. A better one, if we can turn him," he said, and Jamie nodded. "The priest?" he asked, and it was John's turn to nod. "Aye, I'm meeting with Melisandre and Kinvara later. I'll find out then." "Do you know why Kinvara is here?" Jamie asked. "Only that she wishes to speak to me. I'll know later." Why is the rock starting to feel like a red temple? He said with a laugh. A little. Jenna is uncomfortable with them all here, feels we may look as if we're converting. They won't be here for long. I doubt Kinvara's come to stay, he said, and Jamie nodded. He found the red priestesses standing by the cave with Sorella, Kinvara looking on with awe when Rhaenys and Lygaron came out. More so when Jay walked to them and leaned into them both, despite his sister's wishes. He told her she must fly alone tonight, and so she and Lygaron took to the sky. They are incredible, my prince, even more so than your aunts, Kinvara said. Daenerys hatched hers? He asked, and she nodded with a smile on her face. You saw? She asked. I had a vision of flames and fire and my aunt walking from it with 3 dragons. As you saw it, this is what happened, Kinvara said. She is well, safe? He asked. She travels with her companions, her journey not yet complete. Companions? He asked worriedly. The Hound and another of your kin share a sea star lives, my prince, Kinvara said, and he looked at her to see if she was jesting, soon seeing the truth in her words. How? Magic, my prince. Just the same as the dragons themselves, Kinvara said. Where are they? To go west, they must travel east. For now, their journey is not yours, my prince. Why? Because my God wills it so, Kinvara said. I don't serve R'hllor, he said, and she smiled. It has chosen you remain. I came here because there are things you must know, my prince, threats you must be wary of, and places you must travel to when the time is right. What threats? He asked, and she told him of the false dragon, a mummer dragon pretending to be his brother. Jay could feel the anger rise in him, and for a moment it felt uncontrollable to him until he realized it wasn't his, but Rhaenys's fury he felt. Calm, sister. Calm. We'll deal with this imposter together, Jay said in his mind, feeling Rhaenys's rage recede for now. What other threats? He asked. The threat beyond the wall, Blue Eyes, and the army you must defeat. The long night comes, my prince. Only you can lead those who fight against it. Only you are able to bring the dawn, Kinvara said. Others have spoken to me of this. I've sent people to find out more, he said, and Kinvara smiled. Good, my prince. It's good that you prepare already. I, too, will seek to serve you. There are allies who will aid in this fight. I go to them. I'll travel beyond the wall and seek them out. Prepare them for your coming. The free folk? He asked. Is that what they're called? I see no names, my prince. Only a people who will fall without your help, she said, and he nodded. What else? I saw visions in the flames. My prince, a kraken in the sea, a cloth dragon on fire, a snake impaled on a spear, a lion roaring, black birds as far as the eye could see, and beneath them a white wolf struggling to break free. An army of gold marched forward. A city burned, and a woman cried out, she said. And he looked at her and asked her to repeat them so Sorella could write them down. Once she had, he began to try and discern what they meant. A kraken was iron-born. A cloth dragon could be this mummer. A snake and a spear meant something to do with Dorne. Black birds were crows and a white wolf was him. An army of gold could be the Lannisters, but he doubted it for some reason. And as for the city and the woman crying, he couldn't make heads nor tail of them for now. You understand some of these? She said happily when he began to tell her. Some others I need to check against some of my own, or to use the glass candles to check them. They work? She asked, surprised. Aye, they do. He was about to ask her and Melisandre of Thoros when Jaime arrived, the look on his lord's face making it clear he was needed, and so he excused himself and walked over to Jaime. My lord? A letter, John, from King's Landing, Jaime said worriedly. Jay only noticing that Arthur had come with him. What does it say? He asked. Viserys. They have Viserys in their cells, Jaime said. What? How? He said, reaching out and taking the note. Elaine, Viserys Targaryen rests in the king's dungeon. A gift from Illyrio Mopatis. I await your orders. Darren. Jay closed his eyes and reached out, and soon she was on her way. He began pacing the beach, shaking his head. The dragon in his heart had fully risen now. His family. They had another of his family, and he would die if he didn't do something. He'd burn the Red Keep to the ground if he wasn't released. Robert and every single member of his family would die at his hands. His hands were balled up into fists, and both Jaime and Arthur looked at him, neither saying a word though, allowing him to deal with this on his own for now. Rhaenys and Ghost both arrived at the same time, the dragon and the wolf, and it was to his sister he looked. To her he went, and she who calmed him down. They are. No, she said to him in Valyrian. Hausi Alva Anogar. They have our blood, he shouted back to her. Se nakil daol risk tolihen, ziri naejot save zirela, and I'll not risk more of it to save him, she said back. Sir Sherlong. Yin yejota henu jagom, zirshala nejota morgla jagon. So we're to leave him to die, he argued. Sir Dazirla. Then Ao, Pendagon Volonkar, Pendagon. Better him than you, think, little brother, think, she said. He felt Ghost come to him, the wolf leaning against him as he did Rhaenys, Lygeron landing behind them and moving closer. Finally deciding, he turned and walked back into the vaults. Ghost, Arthur, and Jaime walking by his side, Kinvara and Melisandre behind him. Along the way, Arthur and Kinvara told him of his uncle, of what he was like, and why he could not risk himself for him. That he was too important to the realm and the world itself. Arthur, speaking of his house in Kinvara, of a war to come in the future, thankfully Jaime shutting them both up before he reached his room. All of them followed him inside and watched as he grabbed the glass candles. Placing them on the table, he reached for his knife and cut his palm, allowing the blood to pool in his hand before he reached out to the green candle and felt it absorb the blood. Closing his eyes, he pictured King's Landing, the king, and his uncle, watching as the other candles light up as he did so. Seeing the crowds lined up, he knew he would have been too late, and despite every instinct in his body telling him not to, he looked on anyway. King's Landing 296 AC. Sir Richard Lonmouth. The crowd lined up and he took his place amongst them. He'd been back a week and had gone over every plan he could and dismissed them all. A full-scale attack was the only hope for Viserys, and they needed time to organize one. Time they no longer had. When word came to him, he felt sick, that it was Barristan who brought it, making it even worse. As he stared at the fat man, though he had made another plan, one he would speak to his king on. But Illyrio Mopatis would die for this. That was no longer the question. Instead, it was the when and where of it, and as soon as Jay gave him the word, he'd see it done. Looking to the crowd, he could see the eager anticipation in their features, happiness even. To see a man lose his head brought out the savage in the meekest of men. Women, too, even the children were grinning happily. The fat stag and his queen took their time to arrive, the falcon and the fat man already waiting for them, and the way the king so warmly greeted Mopatis only made the bile rise more in Richard's throat. Seeing Sir Ilan make his way to the raised platform had the crowd cheering, the tongueless knight not even acknowledging them, just removing his greatsword to more cheers. We are here today to witness the execution of Viserys Targaryen for treason. Let it be known that this is carried out under the order of good King Robert Baratheon, the first of his name, the King of Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm. Jon Arryn said, "Bring out the dragon spawn," Robert said, laughing. Viserys was dirty, his hair matted, the prince thin and half mad, Richard watching as he looked every inch his father's son. "I am your king. You all should kneel before me," Viserys shouted, and Richard shook his head. Fully mad, he thought. And this was even clearer at what the prince said a moment later, his laughter echoing through the silence of the crowd. "I am Aerys Targaryen, the true dragon, and I will burn you all," Viserys said, laughing even as he was brought to his knees. Sir Ilan stepped forward, his hands on the blade and his stance ready to take Viserys' head when the shout came. "Stop," Robert said. But for a moment none of them knew who had spoken. Not until the king moved forward and asked Ilan for his sword. "It's my crown he wants. It's my blade he'll get. He should be grateful he's not getting my hammer as his brother did," Robert said as the crowd cheered. Richard watched as Sir Ilan reluctantly handed over his sword, and the king stepped forward. The blow was firm and true, and the crowd cheered loudly when not only did Robert take his head from his body, but then he walked over and picked it up, holding it high for all to see. The last dragon spawn. The king shouted as he laughed. "Casterly Rock, 296, AC, Jaime." He watched as Jon got up and walked from the room, the candles going out as he did so. He and Arthur standing up and following while Melisandre and Kinvara walked to the priestess's room. They followed him out to the beach and down to the water's edge, Jon standing there just looking out into the sea. The scream was loud and haunting, Arthur moving to go to him, but Jaime holding him back. The next one was more pained, and the last was one of rage. He watched as Jon knelt down on the ground, as the sun beamed off the water. Then Ghost walked past him and stood beside Jon, the wolf, just like them, standing guard and allowing him to deal with it as he wished. For almost an hour they stood there, and when Jon turned, he could see the redness of his eyes, the tears almost dry on his cheeks. He walked slowly towards them and looked them both in the eye and nodded, not saying a word and just passing them by. Arthur looked to him and turned, as did he, as they then followed him up the beach. Jon walked slowly, and them even more so. The die had been cast, the table was set, and the war was now soon to follow. It had been a week since Viserys was killed, and Jon had barely spoken about it. Beric and Demeric had left to go back to their keeps, with Thoros staying on for some reason, and while that should have concerned him, it was Jon that truly did. When Loras returned from Highgarden, he came to him within a day of being back. He too worried about his friend, and telling Jaime that while he said he was well, he felt he was lying. He and Jenna discussed it. He and Arthur also. He even spoke to both Red Priestesses and to Sorella, all of them telling him basically the same thing. Jon was holding it in, burying it deep inside, and that if he didn't release it soon, he'd explode. Sitting in his room holding his daughter in his arms, watching her laugh and smile at the shadows on the wall, Jaime tried to decide what to do. "Give her to me," Daisy said from behind him, and he turned, not even having noticed she had come in. "What? No, it's all right. I can hold her," he said, looking back down at Joanna. "I know. Give me her and go speak to him, Spar. Take a ride on the dragon, sit by the beach, whatever. But it's bad enough he's brooding. I'll not have you do it also." "Base? No, go, Jaime. You know you wish to, and he needs you. Go." He stood up and handed his daughter to his wife before kissing them both and then walking from the room. The sun was still out, and he breathed a sigh of relief. The idea of a dragon ride was not something he looked forward to. Stopping off at the stables, he had them saddle Honor and Winter, along with Star, Arthur's horse. Jon having gifted him the stallion he'd won from the race in Highgarden, and Arthur being overwhelmed by the gift from his king. Walking down to the vaults, he soon passed Melisandre's rooms. The Red Priestess and her 2 companions were sitting in there along with her guards, and he shook his head. He knew that they could not stay here for too much longer, and hoped Jon understood. He found him standing on the beach, just staring out on the water as he had done after they'd seen Viserys' execution. No murder, it was murder, a voice in the back of his head shouted. "How long?" he asked Arthur, who was standing with Jorah. "Most of the morning." "Jorah, why don't you go take a break? Arthur and I will take it from here." "I'd rather stay, my lord," Jorah said, and Jaime smiled at him. "I know, but go anyway. I'm going to take him for a ride. It'd be for the best if it was less of us," he said, and Jorah nodded and looked to Arthur before walking away. "Just you two?" Arthur asked. "No, you also," he said before he walked to stand beside Jon. They stood silently for a few moments, Jon just staring out on the water, while up further along the beach, ghosts seemed to be chasing the waves, the White Wolf's antics not even being noticed by Jon as he stood there. After the silence began to feel too much for him, Jamie turned to John and saw the expression on his face more clearly. It wasn't sadness or even anger. There was something else there and he couldn't quite make it out, though he decided to not even try for now. "Come, we're going for a ride," he said, and John didn't seem to hear him. "John, Winter, Honor, and Star are saddled. Come," he said, and John nodded before turning to follow him back up the beach. They were no sooner out of the rock than John was off, he and Ghost racing far in front of them, Jamie and Arthur doing their best to catch him up. Though he never left their sight, he was too far ahead of them to catch. He seemed to be pushing Winter to almost her limit. When they did catch him up, he was by the stream, Winter drinking the water as John stood beside the mare speaking to her softly. Jamie walked to him and touched him on the shoulder before motioning to the open space to the left. Once they walked there, he touched him again and then took out his sword. Tapping it 3 times on the ground, he waited until John did likewise, and then the spar began. It was quiet at first, both of them concentrating on getting into a rhythm, the edged blades coming dangerously close to contact on more than one occasion. There would be no hits and no points, the spar more a loosening up than an actual contest. It didn't take too long for him to see how relaxed John got, how the smirk came to his face as they moved faster. After no more than 10 minutes, Jamie called a stop to it, and John nodded before walking over and taking a seat by a tree, Jamie soon following and sitting down beside him. "They all said he was mad, just like my grandfather, that he'd have been a threat to us, to me and my crown," John said. "And you don't care," he said. "He was my uncle, my blood. There's not so much of it around that I can just accept the loss of more," John said angrily. "There was nothing you could have done, John," he said. "I could. We could. I knew he had him, and I did nothing. I could have done more. I should have done more," John said, shaking his head. "John, no. There are 2 members of my family out there in Essos. From what Kinvara told me, there are people after them. This Magister Jamie, he's involved in something and I don't know what it is. Richard is busy with so many things. This has to be a priority. The Magister can wait. I want him dead, but I can wait for that. For him, for Robert, for John Aaron. I can wait because it must be done right. But Danny, Shiera, I can't, Jamie. I can't lose more family," John said as the tears began to flow. Jamie leaned over and wrapped his arm around his shoulder, allowing him to cry against him. After a few moments, he felt John stand up, and so did he. No sooner had he than John hugged him tightly. No words were spoken between them, and Jamie just patted him softly on the back. Thank you," John said as he moved away from him. "John, I'm here for you, always. We'll fix this," he said, and John nodded. The ride back was slower and much different. John was in a far better mood, even japing with them both as they rode. His mood improved even more over the next couple of days, both Jamie and Arthur sparring with him in the mornings and watching as he did so with the others throughout the day. Seeing him laugh with Brienne and Laura's, with Satin and Sorella, almost making it seem like he was fully himself again. Though it was the Raven from Castamere which truly brought him back. Geryon and Joy were returning with Ashara, and Kragan and John's happiness at the news was infectious. Jamie was relieved also when he was told that Thoros and Kinvara would be leaving before then, something Jenna was even happier about. Putting Joanna in her crib that night, he smiled when he saw her sleeping, kissing her forehead before he walked to his bed and climbed in beside his wife. "John is better?" she asked, and he nodded. "Good. Then perhaps we can go about making him a new brother or sister," Daisy said softly, biting his ear. King's Landing, 297 AC. John Aaron. The small council meeting was fuller than usual, Stannis having arrived from Dragonstone with the prince to pretty much only the boy's mother's delight. Sitting at the table with Petter, Lomas, Stannis, Renly, and to his chagrin, Grand Maester Tyrell, he'd reluctantly accepted that nothing he could do would change the Citadel's decision, and yet, despite his own distaste for having a Tyrell at this table, the man had already shown himself a better sort than Pycelle, even if he was a little too focused on the death of his predecessor. "What news, Lomas?" he began, the Maester of Whisperers being a man he enjoyed speaking to. "Tidings from the west, my lord. Apparently it's not just a single red priest who's visited the rock, but 3 of them." Lomas said. 3? He asked. "The one who's been staying there, another who arrived recently from Essos, and Thoros of Myr." Lomas said. "Perhaps Lord Jaime means to convert." Peter chuckled. "This is no laughing matter. Peter, it's bad enough his wife and former squire are tree worshippers. Should he now seek to convert to whatever heathen religion these red priests espouse, there would need to be consequences." Jon Arryn said. And Peter nodded. "Perhaps it's prudent to speak to the High Septon, my lord," Lomas said, and Jon nodded. "Anything else?" "Yes, I want the prince removed from my keep," Stannis said, shocking them all. "But the king," he began, "can raise his monstrous son himself. I fear for my daughter near that boy. His cruelty and pettiness knows no bounds," Stannis said. "You have the freedom to discipline him however you wish, Lord Stannis," Jon said. "No amount of discipline can change that boy, but fine, I'll speak to the king myself," Stannis said. Coin Peter, "How are we situated?" "Good, my lord. Illyrio's loans and taxes have been beneficial, though we are down some because of the manse and extra buildings we've gifted him." "I find myself in agreement with the king on that, Peter. The rewards were well earned," Jon said. "Indeed, my lord, but the loss of income does take a toll. However, we've more than enough in reserve at the moment." "Good. His Grace wishes a tourney, a large tourney. He wants the whole realm to attend, to celebrate Viserys' death. Truly, a death worth celebrating." Renly japed. "It is for the king, and so celebrate it we will. Maester Tyrell, the ravens are to be sent today," he said, handing him the pile of papers he'd spent the night writing up. "Althea Dunlord and—" "Good. Is there any other business?" "No, my lord. That seems to be all," Lomas said. He asked Petter and Lomas to walk with him to the Tower of the Hand, having the Master of Whisperers wait outside while he spoke to Petter in his solar. Offering his friend a glass of wine, he wondered how to breach what he wished to, not sure how much he could even tell his closest friend. "Her Grace Petter, have you noticed anything different about her?" he asked. "Different, my lord? In what way?" "I don't know, Petter. Just different. It's strange, but I find something not quite right, and I wonder if it's just my imagination. I cannot say I have, my lord, though I've been most busy. However, I shall endeavor to take a closer look, to see if I notice anything out of the ordinary," Peter said with a smile. "By Diz, very good, Illyrio Petir. How fare we truly with his gold?" "We are in tremendous debt to him, of course, Lord Hand. Over 1,000,000 gold dragons already, however. We've also managed to remove some of the debts to the Lannisters and the Tyrells." "The Lannisters and the Tyrells can sing for their coin for all I care, but Illyrio has no issue?" "No, my lord." "That plan you were working on with the Tyrells, is it completely dead?" he asked a moment later. "I've had no real opportunity, my lord. Lord Mace has been most quiet in terms of tourneys, and Lord Renly was busy in the Stormlands when Sir Garland wed. Perhaps at the tourney we can place them together." "I'll see it done, my lord," Peter said. "Thank you, Petir." Once he had gone, Lomas walked in, the man sitting down, while Jon reached behind him and grabbed the bottle of wine, pouring both of them a glass. He looked to his Master of Whisperers, eager to hear more. "These red priests, how long have they been in the West?" "Thoros and the other one arrived a few weeks ago. The other's been there for more than a year." "A year?" "Aye, my lord." "Does the High Septon know of this?" "I don't believe so, my lord." "Good. I'll speak to him on it. Any other news you didn't wish to share in there?" "Worry?" he asked. "A few things, my lord." "Lord Wyman, Manderley is sailing to the west. His ship bypassed here to get to there. Also, more and more people seem to be taking up the Norse offer to move there. Our people? He asked, surprised. People from Flea Bottom, my lord? What's the offer? A better life, my lord. Food, shelter, and work. Keep me informed of this. As long as it's the wretches from Flea Bottom, I've no issue with it. If it's more substantial people, tradesmen, and people of a higher standard, then I wish to know. What else? Strange reports from the Riverlands, my lord. Lord, Lomas said. Off. Scorched areas of land, Orusha's carcasses burned to a crisp. And there have been sightings, my lord. Sightings of a dragon. John Aaron almost doubled over in his laughter. The mere idea of it, a dragon out there somewhere, just flying over the Riverlands. My lord? Forgive me, Lomas, a dragon who came forward with these sightings, he asked, still chuckling. Some shepherds, my lord. No doubt looking for the crown to recompense them. Sheer nonsense, of course, he said, and Lomas nodded. Is that all, Lomas? The Whispering Skull, my lord. Lomas said. The what? He asked, looking confusedly at Lomas. I believe I'm not the only one looking into events in the realm. My lord, there's someone else. Someone I've recently become aware of. I know very little other than I believe he's referred to as the Whispering Skull. He works alone or for someone? John asked worriedly. I do not know, my lord, however. I've set my own little birds to find out. I just wished you to be aware that someone else is out there doing as I do. Lomas said. Find this man Lomas and find who he works for. I will, my lord, Lomas said as he stood up and bowed before he walked from the room. The Lannisters. Tyrells, Illyrio, or someone else. It could be anyone. He poured himself another glass of wine as he began to think things through. The idea of someone working actively against them hadn't been one he contemplated, though he began to consider it now. This smelt of Olena's work. The withered old rose would seek to learn all she could, and it would explain why she was so resistant to their efforts. Taking a quill, he quickly wrote a note to Lomas asking him to look into the Tyrells more closely. Later that day, he knelt in the Sept of Baelor, having decided to go visit the High Septon rather than have him come to see him. He felt he needed guidance, and so prayed to the Father and then the crone. Kneeling there, he soon found himself contemplating all his failures and mistakes. He had intended to go to his gods happy, content in knowing he'd done his duty, and that he'd brought the heathens into the fold, that his life had not been in vain. Yet the North was further from the faith than ever. The West was in danger of slipping away too, and he felt his age as he struggled to stand up. Making his way to the High Septon Solar, he passed the other statues, the warrior, the stranger, the smith, the mother, and the maiden. Each of them he'd prayed to at some time or other, and his time was coming when he'd soon see them all in person. Is His Holiness inside? John asked, and the Septon nodded before opening the door to allow him into the room. Ah, Lord Han, an honor indeed to have you grace my humble solar, the Fat One said, and John Aaron tried not to grimace as he looked at the anything but humble surroundings. The honor is mine, High Septon. I come to you with a matter of the gravest urgency, he said, taking a seat and accepting the wine the Fat One offered. A fortuitous visit indeed, Lord Hand. I was planning to come speak to you myself. You were? I was. I received a most strange letter from Riverrun, my lord, Lady Catelyn joining in her husband's request to dissolve their marriage and see it annulled. She did what? John asked, raising his voice so he was almost shouting. A strange request, and yet one not without merit. She quotes many passages from the good book and many tenets of our own treatise. She also raises some interesting points regarding the North itself. Such as? Shh, he asked, trying to stay calm. That this would show the North in its true light, paint them as the heathens that they are. It would allow her to seek to educate her son in the shameful way she's been treated and to use the faith to do so. The fat one said, "Aye, this cannot be allowed." "High Septon, surely you're not considering such a thing?" "I and the most devout will speak on it later, and Septim Mordain personally brought the letter to me." She spoke most favorably on the veracity of Lady Catelyn's faith. "The king would not be pleased by this, High Septon," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "A matter to be discussed later, then, once the most devout have made a decision, and not before. Now, Lord Han, to your own matter." "Oh," he told him of the Red Priests, glad to see the man seem worried and concerned, and even more so that he began to threaten action against Lord Jaime should he even consider converting. Heading back to the Red Keep, he was called to see Robert, finding the king drinking while looking up at the head on the spike. Viserys' pained features staring back down at him. "The tourney. John?" "It's arranged?" Robert asked. "It is your grace. The Ravens will leave tonight." "Good. I want them to see him, John. I want them all to see him," Robert said, laughing and drinking his wine. "The North, 297 AC. Ned." His conversation with Maester Aemon was a difficult one, the recriminations coming thick and fast and Ned not having anything he could really say against them. Everything the man had accused him of was true, and something John, Benjen, Howland, and others, not to mention he himself, had felt he had done long, though he was glad at least to see that the man recognized and welcomed that he was supporting John now. Their talks over their kin were friendly and happy, though, Aemon telling him how proud he was of the man their nephew was growing to be, Benjen speaking of his own pride. Yet through it all, he felt there was something off, something not right, and it was only when he broke his fast the next morning that he realized what that was. She had been absent from their conversation, unable to be a part of it, and that felt wrong to him. So once she had finished her duties, her lessons with Beth and Jane finally ending, Ned asked her to join him in the Godswood, and he was sitting there with Lya and Frost when she arrived. The two wolves had been inseparable since Benjen's arrival, so much so that his brother suggested he take them both to Moat Cailin with him. He watched as Elle gave them both a quick rub, and then smiled at him as she took her seat. "Elle, there's something I need to tell you, a secret I've kept even from Cat, but one I cannot keep from you," he said. And she looked to him. "He's Brandon's, isn't he?" she said softly. "What?" "What, John? He's not your son." None of us truly believed it. Ned, of Brandon, yes, but of you, no," she said, smiling softly as she looked at him. "John is not my son, but no, he's not Brandon's either," he said as he took a breath. "John is the true-born son of Lyanna and Rhaegar Targaryen,"
he said as she gasped.
she said as she gasped. "But how? I don't." "Oh, the rebellion was built on lies. Over the years I've found that out. There were forces at work to remove the Targaryens, and they used my sister and Rhaegar to help them do it." "But he was married, was he not?" "Annulled. I've seen the papers myself. There were letters sent and intercepted. Some were destroyed, but people knew and kept the truth hidden." "So John is his father's heir?" "John is king in all but name, soon to be that too," he said. And she looked at him. "You would fight a war for him?" "I already am. I'm not alone. Lord Jaime, Lady Olenna, Prince Oberyn, the West, the Reach, Dorne, and the North is his." "Why are you telling me?" she asked. "When I married Kat, I didn't know her. Not truly. Even after what happened with Lyanna, I didn't know the full truth of John, only that who he was placed him in danger, so I claimed him as mine own son and hid the secret deep." "You never told her anything?" "I could not. At first I felt it was to keep John safe. Over time it became how she felt about the boy, how she, gods, if you knew the half of it. But I couldn't trust her, and I'm not sorry I didn't tell her," he said as Leia walked over and rubbed against him. "You don't think she may have?" "No, she wouldn't have loved him or cared for him. The threat she believed he posed would have just manifested differently. Rather than a bastard who wishes to usurp Rob, he'd be the danger to all our heads," he said, interrupting her and seeing her nod along. "You trust me?" "I do," he said, smiling at her. She leaned forward and kissed him softly, the kiss quickly becoming more passionate. When she moved away, he looked to her and saw her nod. "I've seen Robert more than once. He stayed at our keep when he came north after the rebellion and how he acted in Highgarden, not to mention his son. John is a far better man than he, and he'll be a far better king. So if he's who you seek to support, then he has mine too," she said, and he kissed her again. They left 2 days later and began the ride to Moat Cailin, stopping off at Sirwin and speaking to Medger, telling him that the wedding would be held soon and that all they were waiting for was the chance to tell the children. Once that was done, they would be wed, and Medger was very happy at the news, even more so when he saw that Ned had kept to his agreement, his daughter's honor intact. Arriving at the moat a little over 2 weeks later, he was surprised to see Howland and some of his men waiting for them, the look on his friend's face causing him some concern. After settling in, he, Howland, and Elle sat in the solar of the gate tower. Howland had greeted Elle warmly and seemed happy with his news. "What is it, Howland?" he asked as Elle poured them all some ale. "Viserys Targaryen is dead," Howland said. "What? How?" "Robert took his head himself, Ned," Howland said, shocking him. "I don't understand. I thought he was in Essos?" "He was. I don't know the details either, not fully, only that Robert executed Viserys personally and that he wishes to throw a tourney to celebrate." "A fucking tourney to celebrate the killing of a boy. How old was Viserys?" 8 and 10, Howland said. "A boy still," Ned said, and Elle nodded. "Aye," Howland said. "Any word from John?" Ned asked, and Howland shook his head. "Can you get a raven to him?" Elle asked, Ned turning to smile at her gratefully. "Aye, I'll make sure one is sent." They spent the next few days looking at the moat itself as well as the lands around it. Fixing up the keep wouldn't be a huge issue. They could bring in stone, and the ground where the old wooden keep had stood could be cleared. The drunken tower would need some sort of support built to stop. It's lean. As for the gate and children's tower, the work on both was more cosmetic. Over time, they could build more towers, and the walls to the north and east would need to be worked on. But to have it up and running as a fully functional keep wouldn't take them too long, which left the issue of an income and supplying the keep. Howland took him for a ride along the Fever River. The fish were plentiful, and some of the small settlements allowed for some income, he supposed. The river itself, though, could be something else, though. A trading post, a stop-off point out into Blazewater Bay. This was beyond his capabilities. He could see the potential, the possibilities, and yet he knew not enough about trade to see how to take advantage. Deciding to speak to John, to Lewin and Wyman, he'd leave this for another day, but he could see that they'd need to build a watchtower overlooking the river's headwaters. "How did you get on?" Elle asked as they rode away from the moat and began their journey back to Winterfell. "It's lesser than I imagined, over years. Perhaps it could be brought back to almost how it was. For now, there's not a huge amount of work to turn it into a decent keep." "Have you decided who to give it to?" she asked. "I don't know. One of Rickard's boys is best, I think," he uttered. "Aye, he'll need a decent match. I'd say one of Mage's girls, but she'd hit me with her mace," Elle said, making him laugh. "Aye, best we not then," he said as she laughed too. The ride back was different, somber as he thought of how his nephew may be feeling. He didn't know much of Viserys Targaryen and had been relieved when there was no mention of Daenerys. But he knew how John would see it, and it worried him, even more so when he rode into Winterfell knowing he'd soon see another of Jon's kin, someone else who'd be hurt over the death of more of his family. He resolved to speak to the old maester later, to offer him what condolences he could, to tell him of the note he'd sent to Jon and hope that was enough. Though he knew it was not. If anything, it was a poor offer. He was making them both. Words wouldn't right this wrong. Not his, nor his house's. This wrong would be answered by the Targaryens and answered in fire and blood. Casterly Rock, 297 AC. Harry is Targaryen. Speaking to Jaime had made him feel somewhat better, but it was the plans he had been making in his head, and then hearing that joy was soon to return, which truly did. While people may have thought him sullen or brooding since he had watched his uncle die, Jay was doing anything but. He was planning how to take the throne, discarding and trying to play out certain events in his mind. War was inevitable. Even were he to attack King's Landing and kill Robert, his brothers, his supporters, would quickly bring the war to his door. So he needed to be ready for it. His armies would need to be ready for it, and risks would need to be taken to get them there. The shadows had been his friend, each step almost calculated to limit word of who he was leaking out. Viserys's death only reinforcing the reasons for that. But he couldn't hide much longer, and nor did he wish to. His wife was hundreds of leagues away, both of them parted by distance and the shadows he hid in. Jay wasn't sure how much more he could take of it, and so that too preyed on his mind. The conversation he was to hold with Thoros had been changed so many times in his head that he almost laughed as he was now back to the one he discarded but a day ago. Still, he walked into the room and saw the 5 servants of the Red God sitting and waiting anxiously for him to speak. Thoros, I'm not sure how much you know of me or what Melisandre and Kinvara have revealed. Only that you are important to our God, and that I should look to the flames to find the truth, Thoros said. Have you? He asked. I've looked and seen nothing. Thoros said, almost annoyed. Would you look with me? He asked, and Thoros nodded. The blood, my prince, Kinvara whispered as he passed her by, and he nodded. He walked to the fire with Thoros, and once he reached it, took his knife and reopened the cut in his palm, the scar barely having time to heal since he'd cut it last week. Allowing the blood drip into the flames, he heard a gasp behind him, and then turned to see Kinvara's smiling face. Thoros beside him, though, was instead staring intently into the fire. When Jay looked at the flames, he saw the Tower of Joy, he saw his mother's face and his father's smile from days long past. He looked on as his father played with a young silver-haired boy, the boy no more than 5 name days old, looking happy and laughing as Rhaegar threw him in the air and caught him. A woman standing there smiling as she watched them play, her hair the same color as his father's and the boy's, and her eyes alight. He saw the boy stand beside the throne while a straggly-haired man spoke to him, a knight wearing white, then walking him from the room. Thoros' voice took him from the flames. Jay's vision blurred as he looked at the red priest through teary eyes. With the cuff of his sleeve, he wiped his eyes as he saw Thoros take a knee. My sword is yours, my prince. Ask of me what you will. Twesh, Thoros said. Rise, Thoros, rise and let us speak some more. There is something I believe you'd like to see, he said, and Thoros did as he asked. Standing in front of the dragons, he, Thoros, and Melisandre spoke of things to come, of what may need to be done. Kinvara would leave with Thoros and Melisandre's guards on the morrow. They would take a ship to Bear Island and be given supplies and horses to travel to the Wall and beyond. Thoros would meet up with Lord Beric. He promised he would do his best to convince the Lord to join Jay when the time was right, or to keep him from the fight. Melisandre was to head to Essos to meet up with the Company of the Rose and to bring them a letter from him, a request and offer of a reward he hoped they'd accept. If they did not, then she was to head to Volantis, to gather men of the Fiery Hand, and to seek his aunt out. We will do as you bid, my prince, Melisandre said. I look forward to seeing you all again, to stand with you all in the fight to come. He said, his voice full and true. As do I, my prince. I'll speak to our allies, ready them for you coming. Kinvara said. Stay safe, my lady. Stay safe, and I shall come, he said as Kinvara nodded. My prince, I shall do my best to bring him on board. I give you my word, Thoros said, and he nodded. Lady Melisandre a moment, he said as they were walking back up the beach. My prince, I want to thank you, my lady, for all you've done for me. If I have not shown my full appreciation, then let me do so now. I've welcomed your presence here, and I wish you a safe journey and a safe return, he said, and Melisandre smiled. R'hllor brought me to you by his will, my prince. Should he will it, I will be returned. Then if I'm truly his chose, he'll grant me the favor and bring you back safely, he said. And she smiled as she walked away. He wrote the letters through the night, one to Daenerys and one to the Company of the Rose, one to the Free Folk and one to Ser Jorah, and finally one to Arya. Some carried offers and requests, and others words of affection and love. He hoped they were accepted for what they were, and that he was doing the right thing with them. Handing them to Kinvara and Melisandre the next day, he bid them farewell and prayed to both his own and their god to see them safe. It was a strange mood he found himself in. As he rode back, he'd put some things in motion, and others he and Jaime would speak to Richard on, inform his Uncle Ned and Lord Wyman and Lady Mage of, and send word to Lady Olenna and Marjorie about. The shadows would hold him back a little while, but the light was starting to peek through, and he couldn't hide among them anymore. John. He heard the excited voice as he stepped out of the lift, before suddenly he saw her running towards him. Joy, he said happily, grabbing her and lifting her up when she jumped into his arms. I missed you, John. So much. Did you miss me? She asked as he spun her around. Of course I did, princess. So much. Want to see how much? He asked, and she nodded. Letting her free from his arms, he spread them as wide as he could, watching as she looked at him. This much. This is how much I missed you, he said, and when she smiled, he felt his own appear almost instantaneously. Kneeling down, he called her close and whispered in her ear, her eyes going wide, and she looked to see if he was japing. When she saw he was not, she nodded happily, and he kissed her cheek. During dinner, she told him all about her time at Castamere, Cregan nodding his agreement almost as if on cue at certain points of her story. Jay looked to Jerian and Ashara, who sat close to each other, and to Cregan, who seemed to have no issue with it, Joy too taking it as how things should be. When the time came to take her for her story, they took the lift to the bottom, Joy having not changed from her riding clothes since she came back. Soon, they were out on the beach, and Jay held her hand as Rhaenys came from the cave, Lygeron following behind his sister. Walking over to the dragons, he told Lygeron and then Rhaenys what he wished to do, his sister happy to have Joy with them for the night's flight. Ready, Joy? Ready, she said with no nervousness at all in her voice, her face full of eagerness for the ride to begin. Helping her up on the dragon's back, he made sure she was sitting safely in front of him, and then wrapping his arms around her, he leaned forward. Sauvagon Rhaenys, he said, and felt Joy breathe deeply as they took to the sky. They flew slowly at first, and he almost laughed loudly when he felt Joy fidget. As much as she was enjoying herself, it was speed she wanted, and so it would be speed he gave her. Sauvagon adere, et se gel mio Rhaenys. Fly fast, like the wind, Rhaenys, he said, and his sister obliged. Joy's laughter echoed through the quietness of the night as Rhaenys flew fast across the water. They flew higher and dipped low, turned swiftly and dropped fast, and through it all Joy laughed and looked back at him. Seeing her smiling face, her hair blowing in the wind, each minute he spent with her was like a balm to his soul. By the time they had landed, he couldn't tell how long they'd been flying, only that it was he and not Joy or Rhaenys who had decided it was enough. Kirim vos mandia. Thank you, sister, he said, leaning into Rhaenys' head before he turned to Joy and walked back up the beach. That was fun. Can we do it again? How about tomorrow? Can we fly again tomorrow, John? Joy said, and he found himself laughing even more. How about we go for a ride on the horses tomorrow, Joy? He asked, and almost doubled over with how she answered. Horses? Oh, well, they'll do, I suppose, she said, sighing. He read to her that night and found her enthusiasm for the flying had worn her out, Joy falling asleep before he had even really begun. Their story time had developed over time, John almost turning it into lessons now. Stories had become little tests with Joy, passing them all with ease. He kissed her forehead and made his way down to his room. Richard would arrive soon, and he found that he couldn't wait to get to work. Casterly Rock, 297 AC. Wyman. The Merman's Trident pulled into the docks of Lannisport and Wyman, his granddaughters, and Robb had been standing on the deck watching the city as it came into view, now looking down to the docks themselves. Wyman smiled to see Kevin and his son, along with their guards, waiting to greet them. He could see Robb and the girls seemed a little disappointed that John wasn't there, but he was not, having expected John to greet them in Casterly Rock rather than here. Wyman, it's good to see you, Kevin said as he welcomed him warmly. You too, Kevin. May I present my granddaughters Winifred and Willa and my squire, Lord Robb Stark, he said as Kevin greeted them all as warmly as he had him. My son Lancel, Kevin said, introducing his boy. Soon they were riding through the streets of Lannisport, Lancel speaking to Robb and the girls and Kevin, while not outright saying something was wrong, his manner suggesting it. Kevin's home was large and luxurious, and as they arrived they were met by his other two sons, Martin and Willem. Kevin having explained that Dorna was resting in bed, a new babe was soon to be born to them. Lancel and his brothers escorted Robb and the girls to their rooms, and he walked with Kevin to his solar, the offer of going to his own room turned down for now. He was no sooner sitting down than the meal was brought in, and he was glad to see Kevin eating with him. What's wrong, Kevin? He asked as he ate. You haven't heard of King's Landing? Kevin asked, and he shook his head, having heard nothing. Viserys Targaryen was executed by Robert the Fat Stag, doing the deed personally. I thought he was in hiding somewhere in Essos, he asked. He was, Mopatis the Magister, whose funding the crown brought him to Robert, Kevin said. No, I take it John's aware. He is, more than that, he saw it. Wyman, don't ask me how other than he saw it, as did Jaime and Arthur. By the gods, I take it he's not handling it well? Surprisingly, he is, but he's become even more determined. I think it's brought things closer. Wyman, we're not far from war, and it's good you've come when you did, Kevin said, and Wyman smiled as he took a swallow of the wine. Our men in Essos? Ha! The Company of the Rose, Wyman. That's who I was asked to negotiate with, and that's who I went to. They damn near threw me from the room until I mentioned John's name, Kevin said with a laugh. His true name? No, Jon Snow. They'd heard of him. Once I brought his name into things and told them Northmen had died along with my own. They took the contract. I'm expecting word soon. Good. The North remembers, Wyman said. As does the West, my friend, Kevin said as he raised his glass in a toast. They were feasted that night, Wyman getting to meet Kevin's good father Harrys and his wife Dorna, who was feeling a lot better. He smiled when the dancing began, his granddaughters dancing with all of Kevin's sons and Winifred more often than not with her betrothed. When he noticed that Willa had not only danced twice as much with Lancel as anyone else, but that she seemed to laugh and smile quite a bit with the lad too, he found himself looking over to see that Kevin had noticed it too, a smile on his face as he looked at them. If they got along, then perhaps they could come to an arrangement. It would be a good match, bringing their houses closer, and something he felt Kevin would be in favor of too. The next morning they were taken on to Casterly Rock. They'd be staying there for a few nights before returning and then spending a week or more with Kevin. Wyman was surprised but happy when Lancel accompanied them, he and Willa speaking animatedly on the ride to the rock itself. Arriving at the rock and then seeing it in person was awe-inspiring. It rose high into the mountain itself, and he was relieved and happy to learn that there was a lift to take them to the top. In the courtyard, waiting to greet them, he saw Lord Jaime and Daisy, Lady Jenna and her children, and beside them, John standing with a blonde girl and his friends. "Lord Wyman, welcome to Casterly Rock," Lord Jaime said as he stood in front of him. "It's an honor to finally see your home, Lord Jaime," he said, and then greeted Daisy and Jenna before he was standing in front of John, his king smiling as he looked at him. "Lord Wyman, a pleasure, truly," John said, and Wyman nodded and smiled back. "For me also, John." After the greetings were done and they were shown to their rooms, he knew he'd have to wait to speak to John and Jaime. He had no wish to go behind the king's back, and his granddaughters and John's brother would take up his time. For now, instead, he just enjoyed being at the Rock, walking down to watch as the spars took place. Seeing John spar up close being something he enjoyed immensely, more so than Rob did, though he did smile as he yielded. Once again they were feasted that night, and once again Willa spent more time dancing with Lancel than anyone else, Wyman and Kevin looking to each other more than once. Jaime was friendly, and Daisy very keen to know of the goings-on in the north. Wyman also found himself enjoying speaking to Lady Jenna. The woman's wit and cleverness, a stark contrast to her husband's lack of both. It was as he was drinking some wine that John came over to him, the king purposeful in his walk and his expression. Wyman stood up and met him halfway and then followed him when he directed him to, John leading him to a small balcony just off the main room. Wyman noticed that Joris was standing at the door while Arthur stood a few feet away, his king making sure they had privacy for whatever he wished to say. "Forgive me, my lord. I had wished to allow you to enjoy the feast and to speak to you on the morrow, but time is pressing and there are things you need to know and see before we speak further." "Of course, John." "You heard of King's Landing?" John asked. "I have, John. I'm sorry for your loss." "I thank you, my lord. But there is nothing anyone can say or do to make me feel better about it. Only bringing Robert Baratheon to his knees would do that. To that end, before you go to your room tonight, I ask you to join me in the vaults, Rob and Winifred too." John said. "Willa," he asked, wondering why his youngest granddaughter was being left out. "I know they both know the truth, my lord, and I'm not leaving Willa out for any lack of trust. My reason is far more practical," John said. "Lancel?" he asked, and John smiled. "They make a good match, and I've not seen Lancel so keen before, my lord. I believe he'll seek to escort her to her room, and I'd not put any obstacle to it unless you're not keen on the match?" John asked. "It's a good match, aye, John, even were Kevin and I not friends, or if Kevin didn't get along with Wylis, which he does, so I'm in favor of it. Then we should not do anything to mess it up." Burstably, for now, Willa will be left out of what I'm to show you. Later, when Lancel is not around, I'll bring her myself. "Very well, John," Wyman said. He found himself nervously awaiting the end of the feast, and then, when it did, time seemed to just stretch on. Finally, Rob and Winifred knocked on his door, and he and May walked to the lift to find John and Arthur waiting for them. They took the lift to the bottom, John telling them he was taking them to the vaults where his rooms were located, and then to the beach beyond. They laughed and japed on the way down, Rob teasing John over something and Winifred stepping in and backing up her betrothed when John got the upper hand. Grey Wind and Ghost, just looking on as the two brothers caught up with each other. He was glad that Winifred was coming, and that Willa would be shown whatever it was to see later. Once Rob had been told the truth then, Wyman knew he had to tell his granddaughters, both of them taking it far better than he had expected. "When you see them, don't be alarmed. You're quite safe," John said as they walked through the corridor of the vaults. "You sleep down here?" Rob asked. I need to be close to her. To them," John said, and Wyman knew then it was the dragons he was speaking of. The cove was dark but peaceful, and John directed them to where Jor's, Laura's, Brienne, and Kragan and another girl were standing, Wyman soon finding out that she was Prince Oberyn's daughter, Sorella. John whispered in Rob's ear and then walked away, Rob's excitement clear as he leaned in to speak to Winifred. All of them then looking eagerly to the cave that John walked into, and then all three of them gasped at what came out of it. The bronze dragon had to be at least 60 feet long. It sparkled in the light, and then within the blink of an eye it was in the air. Normally that would have been enough to draw their eyes. Instead, it was what came out next that did. The white dragon was almost twice the size of the other. It was huge, both in length and sheer size, and seeing John walk calmly beside it was jarring. Where the bronze one had moved across the ground awkwardly, its front legs being its wings, the white dragon walked on all four and moved far more gracefully across the ground. "He's not, is he?" Winifred said as Wyman looked and saw John lean into the dragon and then climb up onto. "It's back." "He is," Laura said, and were it not for the fact that it was just then that the dragon took to the air, Wyman may have turned to look at the boy. The dragon glided easily, and they looked on as it then flew from their sight in mere moments, not seeing anything for a while. They were stunned when suddenly the sky was lit up, that flames against the blackness of the night sky forcing a shiver run down his spine. When John flew over them, he was no more than 50 feet off the ground, the wind from the dragon's wings moving the sand and almost knocking them off their feet. He landed gracefully 20 feet from them and climbed off easily, standing in front of the dragon. He leaned against its head and began speaking words in a language that Wyman didn't know. Soon he was walking towards them, and the dragon was back in the sky, heading out to sea for why Wyman wasn't sure. "The bronze is Lygaron, my son. The white is Rhaenys, my sister," John said, looking at him, and all Wyman could do was nod and smile. Dragons! They had dragons, and they were clearly ready for whatever was to come. Casterly Rock, 297 AC, second moon. J. Harry's Targaryen. Robb had been amazed to see the dragons in flight, and even more so when he promised to take him for a flight one day. Rhaenys and Lygaron had enjoyed showing off, and when he had asked them to produce their flames, even he was surprised at just how easy and how large they were. Rhaenys's he'd had some idea of, but Lygaron was growing quickly, and his flames were far further along than Jay had expected. He had needed Wyman to see Kevin had, Jenna had, and Jamie had, all already knowing that the dragons were ready. While Lady Olenna hadn't seen the flames, she had seen the dragon, his visit to Highgarden not being allowed to end without him showing them all how he had truly gotten there. "You're sure about this?" he asked, and Lady Olenna nodded. "It's a dragon, John. You were able to fly here on a dragon, and I wish to see it for myself." "Her," he said. "Her. I wish to see her. I'm sure your wife and sister would like to see her also, as does Willis. You're flying over the realm, John. People will speak, and should this get out, then we'll be at war. I need to know that they're ready." Olenna said. "Olenna, they're ready," he said, smiling. After making the arrangements for the ride to where Rhaenys would meet them, and having Olenna agree that only left and right could travel the last few miles, they set out with Jay, Marjorie, and Sansa riding together. While Marjorie had seen Rhaenys before, this was Sansa's first time, and he felt nervous about how she'd react. Explaining the dragon had been difficult enough. It was one thing speaking of a dragon as it was, to then say it was your sister really added to that strangeness. Sansa, though, had accepted it and looked forward to seeing Rhaenys, Jay feeling his big sister's eagerness to meet her too. They left the escort at the edge of the forest, Olenna relaxing when both he and Sansa confirmed that there were no people around for miles, Fang's instincts and Rhaenys' presence confirming that to them both. He heard the gasp when she came into view, and looked to see it was Olenna and not Sansa who had done so. "She's so beautiful," his little sister said, and Jay couldn't agree more. He helped Marjorie and Sansa from their horses, and Olenna from the cart she'd reluctantly swapped her carriage for, when they were at the edge of the woods. Holding his wife and sister's hands, and with Arthur walking with Olenna, they moved to where Rhaenys was. Marjorie reached out to touch Rhaenys' head with no hesitation, and when Sansa saw her do it, his sister did likewise, Lady Olenna having to almost be goaded into doing so. "She will grow more?" Olenna asked. "She will. For many more years she'll grow," he said, and saw her smile. "And she can produce flames?" she asked. If she wished to, she could burn this wood down completely, Jay said, and felt his sister agreeing in his head. After many more questions and promises to both Sansa and Marjorie that he'd take them for rides when he could. He and Arthur escorted them back to the rest of their guards. Jay said his goodbyes, hard though they were, and Olenna whispered that she was ready when needed in his ear, and then he and Arthur walked back, ready to fly back to the Rock. Now, it was with that knowledge that he knew he would need to show others, to have them see for themselves just how ready the dragons would be when needed, though he had not expected to find himself rushing to make ready for war. He had thought they had more time, and practically they had, but Viserys' death showed the folly and dangers of waiting. The war needed to come on their terms, at a time of their choosing, and it needed to be sooner rather than later. He walked to the room and found Jaime, Kevin, Jenna, Geryon, and Wyman waiting. There were more he wished to speak to. Richard would arrive soon, according to a whisper he had been given, and he'd like to speak to his Uncle Ned, though Wyman could relay a message. He also wished Tyrion was still here, that he had waited, and then he could travel with a message to Oberyn, and instead he hoped his ravens would arrive as his uncle did. While Jorah and Walder waited outside, he asked Arthur to join him inside, the knight glad to be included in the planning stages, and Jon wishing for his input. Unfortunately, he found out when he arrived that Robert had another surprise in store for him. "Jon," Jaime said, handing him the raven, which he took and read quickly. "He's nothing if not consistent. Gods, what a fucking fool," he said as he looked to the others. "What do we do, Jon?" Jenna asked. "We go. Anything else would seem strange. We go and enjoy Robert's last tourney," he said to Nods. "My niece and nephew?" Jenna asked. "Myrcella, I don't know. I need to speak to Barristan Tommen. I'll sort out personally," he said, and Jenna nodded. "What are your orders, my king?" Wyman asked. "We need to move, to bring in all who we can or will need. It's time the lords of the north found out the truth. Lord Wyman, the lords of the west, and Reach too," he said, and watched as Jaime nodded and Kevin looked to him before nodding a moment later. "We can use the tourney to bring more to the fold, but we need to be careful. My father tried to do the same, and in the end, it cost him his and my mother's life along with far too many of my family, and I'll not have King's Landing be my Harrenhal," Jay said. "Loyalist houses only during the tourney, my king. Those on the fence once we're safely back in the west." Arthur said, "Agreed. We make no move until Tyrion is back either. We do nothing until we know that all those we care about are as safe as we can make them." And saw Kevin nod in approval. "The dragons are ready?" Geryon asked. "They are. Lygaron and Tyrion are as one, and Rhaenys and I are ready," he said to Nods. "The ships?" Jaime asked. "Are practically warships as they are. 2 new ones should be ready before the tourney ends." "I'll have them fitted out even more fully, Wyman," Kevin said. "No, I'll see 2 of my own fitted as such also," Wyman replied. "The Magister?" Jaime asked. "Richard will take care of him. I'll have the letters to deal with Baelish ready myself," Jon said. "Then we're agreed. Once the tourney ends, we prepare for war?" Jenna asked. "Agreed," Geryon said. "Agreed," Kevin said, as did Wyman and Jaime, and then Jenna herself. "I thank you all for what you've done and will do for me. I'll not forget it," Jay said as he walked from the room, eager to tell Rhaenys it was almost time. There was much more to be done. He needed to speak to Richard, and he had letters to write to his Uncle Ned and others, but taking the lift down with Arthur, Horse, and Walder beside him, Jay felt better than he had in some time. "Are you with me?" he asked simply. "To the death, my king," Arthur said, as did Jorah, and Walder and Jay nodded, closing his eyes and praying it wouldn't come to that for any of the people he cared for. Beyond the Wall, 29/7 AC. Bloodraven. War was inevitable, and had always been coming. He'd started and taken part in more than one. He'd helped instigate others since he had come here. Some were mere battles, and one in which he had almost achieved his goals, only for the old gods to find a way to interfere. While he was deep below the sea, he had watched and waited. And though it had taken him some time, he had found the thread he had sought. Family ties no longer bound him, and he had taken his kin's life before and would soon again, though this one would be a fight for the ages. For years he had tried to stop it coming, done everything in his power to influence events to see it not come to pass. Better to kill the warrior before he became who he was to become than to face him afterward. Things he had tried, though, had failed. He had killed the mother and father only for the child to be born to another. He had seen both of them dead only for the child to be born anyway. He had influenced events so the child would never grow as he should, only for the gods to take a side and work against him. Had it just been the old gods, then he may have been their match, may have been able to keep his intentions hidden. But their brother too played his role, sending his own favors to the boy, his own wisdom and influence. Death scared him because he knew what awaited him there. It was why he'd taken their offer, and why they were fools to give it to him. Now, along with their servants, who he'd so conditioned to be his, it was time to play once more, and the stakes in this game were higher than they had ever been. "You are sure of this?" Leif asked. "I am. You must see them fall. They come to serve the great other, and they come soon," he said, and Leif nodded. "Where?" she asked. "Wait for them near the fist. They should come to you within the next 2 moons," he said, and Leif nodded. "End them, Leif. Give them no quarter, as they'll not give you any," he said, and saw her determined look. Strange bedfellows were nothing new to him, and he knew here. He was making an ally of the strangest of them all, but self-preservation trumped anything else for him. Let the Night King have the free folk, or most of them anyway. The boy would win but lose to him in the process, and he would be free to move once more. He felt the link growing ever stronger, the blood bond soon to be fully realized. When the time came, he would have the upper hand, and he thanked Aemon for giving him the opportunity. Closing his eyes, he saw her different colored ones, the pen resting in her hand as she pierced her skin, he doing likewise, and the bond had formed, the link between them lasting for some time. It was when she left that it stopped working, only remnants of what had once been left within, and it was why he had no reluctance in giving it up, though even he had never imagined it would play such a crucial role in his plan. "I'll see you soon, my prince. Your dreams will be mine to play with," he said as he closed his eyes and dipped down below the sea once more.